Hey friends, settle in, get comfortable, portable. Tonight we enter the dry plains of southern Mesopotamia, where more than a century of excavation has brought thousands of clay tablets back into the light. Among them are astronomical observations, royal records, hymns, legal documents, and collections of omens written by generations of trained scribes. Archaeologists working at ancient cities such as Nippur, and Nineveh have recovered fragments that reveal how seriously people once watched the heavens. Scholars connected with institutions including Oxford University, Yale University, and major museums have spent decades translating these signs impressed into clay. Yet one modern claim has begun circulating with particular persistence. It suggests that an ancient Sumerian tablet describes 5 signs connected with the years 2026 and 2027, with the final sign perhaps appearing around us now. The claim sounds precise, the surviving evidence is not. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quiet around you, tell me where in the world you are listening from, and what the local time is where you are. You find yourself standing beneath a wide evening sky, somewhere near the lower reaches of the Euphrates River. The ground is warm beneath your sandals, although the sun has already dropped beyond the horizon. Fine dust settles against mud brick walls, somewhere nearby. Reeds scrape softly together in the night breeze. The scent of smoke and baked clay drifts from a courtyard where a lamp has just been lit. This is the world in which celestial signs mattered. For the people of ancient Mesopotamia, the sky was not merely decoration above the fields, it formed part of an ordered universe in which unusual events could carry meaning for kings and communities. A strange eclipse, an unexpected storm, or an unusual planetary appearance might be recorded carefully by specialists trained to notice patterns. Records preserved from later Mesopotamian kingdoms confirm that scholars compiled enormous collections of such observations. These texts did not operate like modern newspaper horoscopes. They often followed a conditional structure. If something unusual happened in the heavens, then a particular consequence might be expected on Earth. A typical omen could connect an eclipse with trouble for a ruler, or another might associate the colour of a celestial body with harvest conditions. A strange wind could signal political tension. These connections were built gradually from tradition, observation, memory, and religious interpretation. The system was surprisingly organised. Scribes copied earlier texts with great care, sometimes preserving traditions that were already ancient in their own lifetime. Clay tablets could be stored in temple archives or royal libraries, creating long chains of knowledge stretching across generations. A student learning the craft might copy words written centuries earlier, never imagining that modern archaeologists would one day read the same impressions beneath electric lights. This is where the mystery begins to deepen. Modern stories sometimes describe a single Sumerian tablet containing a sequence of 5 warnings. The narrative usually suggests that these warnings can be matched directly with events expected during 2026 and 2027. The first problem is simple but important. Ancient Sumerians did not number years according to the modern calendar used today. Their methods of dating were entirely different. Some years were named after significant events, rulers, construction projects, military victories, or religious acts. Later Mesopotamian societies developed other systems for organising time, but none would naturally contain a statement equivalent to the modern year 2026. That does not make the ancient texts uninteresting, quite the opposite. It means the real question becomes more fascinating than the sensational version. Instead of asking whether a tablet literally names a modern date, you begin asking how ancient warnings could be transformed into modern predictions. Somewhere between damaged clay and contemporary interpretation, meaning can shift. A fragment becomes a sentence. A sentence becomes a prophecy. A prophecy acquires a date. And eventually so people begin watching the calendar. There is something almost inevitable about this process. Human beings dislike unfinished patterns. When several events resemble an old warning, the mind naturally tries to connect them. Psychologists have long studied this tendency to recognize meaningful structures even when coincidence may be involved. Ancient diviners were not modern psychologists, of course, but they understood something important about expectation. People watch more carefully when they believe a sign has appeared. Imagine a royal scholar standing on a temple platform during an eclipse. The city below grows unusually quiet, dogs bark somewhere beyond the walls, the moon darkens slowly, and people who understand nothing about orbital mechanics stare upward with understandable concern. The scholar has inherited generations of interpretations. He knows what previous tablets say. He also knows that the king expects an answer. In some Mesopotamian traditions, rulers could even respond to dangerous omens through protective rituals. One particularly unusual practice involved placing a temporary substitute ruler on the throne when an eclipse was believed to threaten the actual king. The real monarch could withdraw from public danger while ritual specialists attempted to redirect whatever fate the omen appeared to announce. It sounds theatrical to modern ears. Yet it reveals something profound about the ancient understanding of prophecy. Omens were not always viewed as fixed predictions. A warning could sometimes be answered. Ritual action might alter the outcome. The gods might reveal danger precisely because humans still had time to respond. That detail complicates modern claims considerably. If an ancient omen describes disorder, drought, political conflict, or celestial disturbance, it does not automatically function as a countdown toward one future year. It belongs to a system where signs were interpreted according to context, location, timing, kingship, ritual practice, and many other variables. Historians still debate how much these omen traditions emerged from systematic observation and how much they reflected inherited symbolic associations. Researchers studying Mesopotamian astronomy have shown that careful observation eventually became extraordinarily sophisticated, yet the boundary between empirical recording and religious interpretation remained very different from the categories used in modern science. You can almost feel that boundary beneath your fingertips. Imagine holding a clay tablet no larger than your hand. The surface is covered with tiny wedge-shaped marks pressed by a reed stylus. Some signs remain sharp, others have worn away. A corner may be missing completely. Every missing piece creates possibility. This is where fringe interpretations often enter. A damaged line can invite reconstruction. An unfamiliar technical phrase can be translated differently by different specialists. A symbol associated with kingship might become, in modern retellings, a reference to governments. A reference to famine might become a prediction of global economic collapse. The transformation can happen gradually. Sometimes nobody deliberately invents anything. One writer summarizes another. A video simplifies the summary. A social media post removes the uncertainty. By the time the claim reaches millions of people, a cautious scholarly interpretation may have hardened into a supposedly exact prophecy. And yet something remains. The ancient fascination with signs is genuine. The fear of disorder is genuine. The astronomical observations are genuine. The clay tablets are genuine. That mixture makes the modern story difficult to dismiss casually. Perhaps the most interesting possibility is not that ancient scribes somehow calculated our modern calendar. Perhaps it is that the fears recorded in their tablets return again and again because human societies continue facing familiar pressures. Flood, drought, war, unstable rulers, strange skies, disease, falling harvests. These events haunted Mesopotamia because they could change life quickly. They still command attention because modern technology has not removed humanity from nature or uncertainty. Your mind drifts toward the darkened rivers. Water moves slowly through the reeds. Somewhere across the plain, a small fire glows beside a wall. Above it all, stars emerge one by one, exactly as they did for the scribes who once studied them. They did not know the year 2026. They did know fear. They knew patterns. And they knew that whenever the ordinary rhythm of the world seemed disturbed, people searched for meaning. Perhaps that is where the 5 signs truly begin. Not with a date carved into clay, but with an ancient habit of watching the world closely, waiting for the moment when something familiar suddenly feels wrong. The first sensation is heat trapped inside stone. You stand near the ruins of an ancient settlement where walls once rose above crowded lanes, workshops, courtyards, shrines, and storage rooms. The evening air carries dust and the faint mineral smell of baked earth. Somewhere beneath your feet, layers of human occupation remain compressed into the ground, each generation building over the last until an entire city becomes a buried archive. Archaeology often begins with silence. A trench is opened slowly, soil removed by careful hands, and tiny changes in colour begin revealing vanished floors and walls. Pottery appears first, then animal bones, ash, broken tools, beads, seals, and eventually tablets. Clay seems humble compared with gold or carved stone, yet clay became one of Mesopotamia's greatest gifts to history. It could remember almost anything. Scribes pressed signs into damp clay using a cut reed. The marks formed wedges, angles, and impressions arranged into words, numbers, names, accounts, prayers, contracts, and observations. A document intended for temporary use might remain unfired, while accidental burning could harden it permanently. When buildings collapsed in fire, destruction sometimes became preservation. That irony still surprises archaeologists. A room could burn, shelves could fall, and tablets could scatter across the floor. Centuries later, excavators might uncover the hardened remains where they landed. The disaster that destroyed a library could unintentionally protect its records for thousands of years. Among the most famous discoveries came from Nineveh, where 19th century excavations uncovered the royal library, assembled under King Ashurbanipal. Thousands of fragments emerged from the ruins, preserving literature, medicine, rituals, dictionaries, mathematics, and omen collections. Scholars working in major universities and museums continue joining fragments that were separated during excavation or dispersed between collections. Some pieces fit like broken glass. Others may wait generations for recognition. A fragment stored in one museum could belong beside another fragment housed elsewhere. The handwriting may match. The clay composition may resemble the same batch. A line beginning on one piece may continue perfectly on another. Researchers sometimes discover these joins long after excavation, giving damaged texts new meaning without digging another centimetre of earth. This slow reconstruction matters deeply when people speak about mysterious tablets. Ancient documents rarely arrive as complete books with clean beginnings and endings. Many survive as fragments containing half sentences, missing corners, damaged columns, or lines erased by weather and pressure. You can picture a conservator turning one beneath soft light. The clay surface is dull brown, almost ordinary, until faduyas fall across the wedge-shaped signs. Then the marks suddenly deepen. A tiny change in angle becomes a word. A damaged stroke may determine whether a sentence refers to a king, a city, a celestial body, or something else entirely. Translation becomes detective work. Mesopotamian writing also changed over centuries. Different languages were written in cuneiform, and the same sign could carry several values depending on context. Sumerian texts might be copied by later scribes who spoke another language in daily life. Students learned old compositions as part of professional education, rather like scholars studying a prestigious language long after it stopped being commonly spoken. Yale University holds major collections of Mesopotamian tablets, while scholars associated with Oxford University and other institutions have contributed extensively to understanding ancient scribal culture. Research has shown that tablets ranged from practical records to highly technical scholarly works. The diversity is enormous, which makes claims about a single secret prophetic tradition especially difficult to evaluate without knowing the exact tablet. A receipt can resemble a ritual text to an untrained eye. The script looks equally mysterious. One tablet might record barley allocations, another might preserve a hymn, another might list medical symptoms, another could describe the movements of the moon. The appearance alone does not reveal the category. Even ancient scribes needed systems for organizing knowledge. They created lists, copied standard compositions, and grouped observations by subject. Some omen series became vast reference works arranged according to patterns in nature and society. The goal was not simply to preserve isolated predictions, it was to create structured knowledge that specialists could consult. You hear the scratch of a reed across wet clay. A student sits beside an older teacher in a courtyard shaded from the sun. The teacher speaks a line. The student copies it, perhaps imperfectly, then smooths the surface and begins again. Education required repetition, memory, discipline, and familiarity with signs that could shift meaning according to context. One quirky feature of scribal life survives in school exercises. Students occasionally left behind clumsy handwriting, copied vocabulary, and signs that reveal their mistakes. Some tablets look less like sacred mysteries and more like homework abandoned thousands of years ago. That makes the ancient world feel unexpectedly close. A frustrated student once pressed too deeply. Another crowded signs near an edge. Someone corrected a line. Someone practiced until the wedges became cleaner. These small imperfections remind you that cuneiform was produced by people, not by an abstract civilization moving silently through history. The scholarly debate becomes especially interesting when researchers ask how knowledge moved between cities. Did specialists preserve uniform traditions across Mesopotamia, or did local schools maintain distinct interpretations? Evidence suggests both standardization and variation existed. Certain texts circulated widely, while local practices could shape how they were copied or understood. That uncertainty matters. A line found in one city may have belonged to a broader tradition, but its local context could change its significance. A celestial omen associated with one region might not carry identical meaning elsewhere. Political boundaries shifted, dynasties rose and fell, temples maintained their own intellectual traditions. The clay travelled through changing worlds. Merchants carried tablets for business, officials sent letters, scholars exchanged knowledge, conquerors inherited archives. New rulers preserved older texts because ancient authority remained valuable, even when political power changed hands. A tablet could therefore become old long before it became archaeological. Imagine a scribe copying a composition already regarded as ancient. He may treat its language with respect because it comes from a prestigious past. Certain expressions might already feel archaic to him. He preserves them anyway, believing the inherited wording matters. That creates layers of time inside one object. The physical tablet might belong to a later century while the tradition it copies reaches much further back. Modern readers sometimes overlook this distinction. They see ancient writing and assume every idea originated when that particular clay object was made. Historical reconstruction is rarely so simple. Archaeologists examine the excavation layer, tablet shape, handwriting, vocabulary, grammar and associated objects, specialists compare parallel versions from other sites. The process can narrow dates and identify traditions, yet damaged evidence often leaves room for argument. A fringe claim may flourish precisely inside those gaps. Someone sees a broken line and imagines a hidden revelation. Someone else assigns a modern event to an ancient symbol, and the interpretation spreads because mystery travels faster than philology. Still, the genuine story is richer. Thousands of clay documents preserve a civilization speaking in many voices. Farmers appear through accounts, kings appear through inscriptions, and children appear through school texts. Priests appear through rituals, astronomers appear through observations, diviners appear through vast systems designed to interpret an uncertain world. You run your imagination across the rough edge of a tablet. It feels small enough to disappear inside your palm. Yet within that small object may survive a moment when someone looked at the sky, noticed something unusual, and decided it deserved preservation. Perhaps the original observer expected the message to matter for weeks or months. Instead, the clay outlived kingdom. It survived language. It survived the people who first understood every sign without difficulty. Now it rests beneath museum light, surrounded by labels, catalogue numbers, scholars, and visitors who lean closer and searching its damaged surface for meaning. The unsettling part is not that the tablet speaks clearly. It is that it speaks imperfectly. And whenever the past leaves unfinished sentences, the modern imagination is always tempted to finish them. Your ears catch a different sound now. Not the scratch of a stylus, but the quiet murmur of people gathering on a rooftop. The air has cooled. A faint smell of oil smoke rises from clay lamps, while the city settles beneath a sky crowded with stars. Somewhere nearby, a child asks why the moon has changed colour. An older man does not answer quickly. He looks upward first. For ancient Mesopotamian observers, the heavens were rarely considered empty space. The sky formed part of a living order that connected gods, rulers, weather, harvest, human behaviour. When something unusual appeared above the city, it could therefore become more than a beautiful event. It might become a message demanding interpretation. That idea feels strange today. Yet it was not random superstition. Mesopotamian scholars developed elaborate systems for classifying celestial events, especially eclipses, planetary appearances, unusual stars, halos, clouds, thunder, and violent winds. Records confirm that trained specialists watched the sky with extraordinary patience. Their observations eventually became among the most detailed astronomical traditions of the ancient world. You can almost sense their concentration. A scholar stands on a high platform with a clear view of the horizon. He knows where certain stars should rise. He knows roughly when the moon should appear. He notices colour, direction, duration, brightness, and position. What seems ordinary to everyone else becomes evidence in his hands. An eclipse receives particular attention. The moon slowly enters darkness, and the effect is unsettling even when you understand its cause. Imagine experiencing it without modern astronomy. The familiar silver disk begins to vanish. Its brightness weakens. A reddish shadow spreads across the surface, turning an ordinary night into something unfamiliar. The city notices. Animals behave differently. People whisper. Priests begin preparing rituals. Messengers may hurry toward officials, somewhere inside a palace. The ruler waits for a report from men whose profession involves explaining what the sky appears to be saying. Ancient omen collections often treated eclipses according to many variables. The month mattered. The direction of the shadow mattered. The section of the moon affected could matter. Even the timing during the night might influence interpretation. This was not casual fortune-telling. It resembled a complicated symbolist language. A celestial sign might indicate danger for a ruler. trouble in a neighbouring land, problems with crops, or instability within the kingdom, the same phenomenon could produce different meanings depending on specific details. The omen system functioned almost like a vast decision tree built across generations. Scholars still debate how much of this structure came from long observation and how much developed through inherited symbolic logic. Some connections may have grown from repeated historical associations. Others appear to reflect religious concepts about direction, colour geography, and divine authority. The boundary remains difficult to draw. What is clear is that Mesopotamian scholars recorded far more than eclipses. Planets also attracted attention because they behaved differently from the fixed stars. Night after night, most stars seem to preserve recognizable arrangements. Certain bright objects, however, shifted position across the sky. They wandered. That wandering required explanation. Planets could disappear into the sun's glare and return weeks later. They could reverse apparent direction for a period, tracing strange loops against the stars. Their brightness could change. Occasionally, two bright planets might appear unusually close together from an observer's perspective. To modern astronomy, these events arise from predictable orbital motion. To an ancient observer, they could look intentional. The planet associated with a major deity might appear in an unusual location, and specialists could interpret that position according to established tradition. A bright planet lingering near another celestial object could be read as a relationship between divine powers, kingdoms, or political fortunes. Your mind drifts across the horizon. You see Venus shining before dawn, brilliant enough to command attention even without telescopes. You understand why ancient observers return to it repeatedly. Its appearances are regular enough to encourage careful tracking, yet dramatic enough to inspire religious meaning. Records from Mesopotamia preserve long traditions associated with Venus. One famous body of observations tracks its appearances and disappearances across the horizon, linking these events with possible consequences for the land. Scholars have studied such records because they combine astronomical observation with omen interpretation in a particularly revealing way. There is a peculiar beauty in that combination. A scribe does not separate science from religion as neatly as a modern textbook might. He watches carefully because the gods may be speaking. Precision strengthens interpretation. Better observation does not weaken belief. It may actually make the divine message feel more legible. Thunder also carried meaning. A storm approaches from the distance. Clouds thicken over the plain. The scent of dust changes suddenly as wind moves through narrow streets. Then thunder rolls across the city, deep enough to tremble through plaster walls. People listen carefully. Direction matters again. If thunder comes from one quarter of the sky, it may carry one implication. If it follows unusual clouds or arrives during a particular month, specialists may record it differently. Lightning, heavy rain, dust storms, and sudden winds could all enter broader omen traditions. One quirky detail is how seriously apparently minor atmospheric events could be treated. A halo around the moon, an unusual cloud formation, or a strangely coloured sky might receive attention because the unusual itself was meaningful. The ordinary world created expectations. The abnormal demanded explanation. You begin to understand how a culture trained to notice anomalies might produce enormous omen collections. Every strange event becomes part of a larger pattern. Every pattern can be compared with inherited texts. Every interpretation becomes another layer within the system. Modern minds do something surprisingly similar. You see an unusual weather event and search for context. You notice several rare events occurring close together and wonder whether they are connected. You watch headlines accumulate and begin sensing a pattern even before anyone has demonstrated one. The impulse is ancient. The difference lies in the framework. Mesopotamian scholars often assumed that unusual events could reflect divine intentions. Modern science searches for physical causes, statistical relationships, and measurable mechanisms, yet both begin with observation, because something unexpected has appeared. You look upward again. A meteor cuts briefly across the darkness. It lasts only seconds. Someone nearby gasps. For an ancient observer, such a light might join a vast category of signs associated with sudden celestial appearances. Comets, meteors, unusual stars, and glowing phenomena could be difficult to classify, especially when they appeared without warning. The rarer the event, the more memorable it became. That helps explain why prophetic traditions remain so powerful. Human beings remember disruptions more strongly than uneventful nights. A normal moon inspires little fear. A darkened moon creates stories. A quiet sky becomes background. A strange sky becomes memory. Scholars studying Mesopotamian celestial divination continue discussing whether certain omen texts preserve actual event sequences or idealize patterns created by scribal tradition. Some entries may record direct observation, others may represent hypothetical possibilities assembled for completeness. That distinction matters because an omen collection does not necessarily describe something that already happened. It can describe what might happen. Imagine a scholar compiling every plausible celestial abnormality his tradition recognizes. He's building a reference system, not writing a single prediction. A later reader, unfamiliar with that purpose, might mistake the sequence for a chain of future events. Then centuries pass. The language becomes distant, tablets fragment, interpretations change. A modern reader encounters 5 unusual celestial conditions arranged close together and begins asking whether they correspond with current events. Suddenly an ancient classification system feels prophetic. The transformation is subtle. You remain beneath the Mesopotamian night, listening to the quiet movement of sandals on packed earth. Above you, Mars glows reddish near the horizon. Venus will appear later. Clouds gather faintly in the west. Nothing has happened yet, but trained eyes are watching. They are waiting for darkness to change shape, for a planet to wander strangely, for thunder to arrive from an unexpected direction, or for a brilliant object to appear where no familiar star belongs. The heavens do not need to speak aloud. People have already learnt how to listen. The room smells faintly of wax smoke and old reeds. You imagine a scribe seated beside a low table, surrounded by tablets copied from copies of older tablets. Some belong to his own century, others preserve phrases that have already travelled across generations. He is not inventing a prophecy, he is maintaining a tradition, and that distinction changes everything. Mesopotamian knowledge rarely remained frozen in a single age. Texts moved between cities, courts, temples, and scholarly families. A composition could begin in one cultural setting, receive additions in another, then survive through copies made centuries later. By the time a later scholar handled it, the original context might already feel distant. This slow transmission created layers. Sumerian language held immense cultural prestige long after everyday speech changed. Later scholars continued studying and copying older compositions because antiquity itself carried authority. A phrase written in an ancient form could feel powerful precisely because it belonged to a revered intellectual past. You can sense the appeal. An old tablet does not merely contain words, it carries the impression that earlier generations knew something worth preserving. That feeling is remarkably durable, and it still influences how modern readers respond to ancient texts. Yet copying is never perfectly neutral. A scribe may correct spelling, another may explain an obscure term, a later scholar may place one omen beside another because they seem related. A damaged line may be restored from memory or from another version. Over centuries, small decisions accumulate. The text begins to travel through minds. This is one reason the label Sumerian can become misleading when applied too broadly. Some ideas associated with early Mesopotamia survive most clearly in later Babylonian or Assyrian copies. The tradition may preserve older material, but the physical tablet itself could belong to a very different period. Records confirm that large scholarly collections were assembled from earlier sources and organized into extensive series. These compilations could contain hundreds or even thousands of individual omen statements. Their structure reflected generations of classification, not one sudden act of revelation. That matters greatly. Imagine finding furtive lines close together in a later collection. A modern reader might treat them as a connected prophecy, yet the ancient compiler may have grouped them because they shared a category, such as eclipses, storms, or unusual planetary behavior. Sequence does not always mean prediction. Sometimes it simply means organization. This is where modern retellings often become slippery. A translator produces a cautious rendering, a popular writer simplifies it, another writer removes the uncertainty. Eventually the passage begins sounding more definite than the original evidence allows. The transformation feels almost invisible. A phrase meaning trouble may become collapse. A reference to a ruler may become world leadership. A celestial disturbance may become a specific modern astronomical event. Then someone attaches a date based on a numerical pattern never stated by the ancient text itself. The prophecy appears to sharpen with every retelling. In reality, the evidence may be becoming less precise. Scholars connected with major institutions such as Oxford University and Yale University have long emphasized the importance of textual context when interpreting cuneiform. A sign can change meaning according to neighboring words, grammatical form, period, and scribal convention. Isolated phrases are therefore especially dangerous. You feel this when looking at a broken tablet. One missing corner may remove the beginning of an omen. Another damaged edge may erase the consequence. The surviving middle looks suggestive, but the complete sentence remains uncertain. Fragments invite imagination. That invitation becomes stronger when the subject already feels mysterious. A phrase about darkness, upheaval, or kingship sounds immediately dramatic to modern ears, yet in its original setting it may have belonged to a routine scholarly category rather than a singular warning. There is also the matter of language itself. Ancient scribes could use traditional formulas that carried technical meanings unfamiliar to modern readers. A word translated loosely as destruction might refer to defeat, loss, or ritual danger rather than complete annihilation. A phrase involving the land could refer to a specific kingdom rather than the entire world. Scale becomes distorted easily. A local omen becomes global. A royal concern becomes planetary. A seasonal warning becomes a fixed date. One fringe theory sometimes claims that later scribes deliberately encoded earlier prophecies to hide knowledge from ordinary people. The evidence for such deliberate concealment remains weak. Yet the idea persists because cuneiform already looks secretive to anyone unable to read it. The script itself encourages fantasy. Rows of wedge-shaped signs resemble a code. They feel remote, technical, almost forbidden. It is easy to imagine hidden messages where the actual content may be administrative, scholarly, or ritual. Still, scholarly debate remains lively around how much innovation occurred during the transmission of omen literature. Some researchers argue that scribes mostly preserved inherited forms faithfully. Others emphasize editorial development, local variation, and the creative organization of older material into new systems. The answer may differ from text to text. You picture two scribes separated by several centuries. The first writes an omen after studying inherited teaching. The second encounters the line in a damaged copy and preserves it inside a larger collection. He may understand the old wording differently, yet he still believes the tradition deserves protection. Neither man nor pseudothelpachum, yet their hands meet in the clay. This layered pre-layered process explains why ancient prophecy cannot always be traced to one moment. A modern reader searching for a single author or precise date may be asking a question the tradition itself never meant to answer. The text behaves more like a river. It carries older material forward, gathering additions, losing details, changing direction, and still remaining recognisably connected to what came before. You hear the soft scrape of a tablet being lifted from a shelf. A scholar compares two versions of the same omen. One contains an extra phrase. Another uses a different sign. He pauses, deciding which reading makes more sense. That small hesitation matters. Centuries later, a translator will face the same problem. Then a modern storyteller may choose one version because it sounds more dramatic. This is how uncertainty becomes certainty. The process does not require deception. It only requires distance. The farther a text travels from its original setting, the more tempting it becomes to fill the gaps with familiar modern concerns. Climate anxiety, political tension, war, economic instability, and strange astronomical events can all seem to fit ancient warnings because ancient societies feared many of the same disruptions. The resemblance feels powerful. But resemblance is not chronology. A warning about failed harvests may sound relevant whenever food systems are strained. A warning about rulers may feel current during political crises. A warning about unusual skies becomes compelling whenever eclipses or bright planetary events attract public attention. The ancient words remain flexible because human fears repeat. That is both the strength and danger of prophecy. You begin to see the hidden mechanism beneath the modern claim. It is not necessarily one mysterious tablet pointing cleanly toward 2 modern years. It may instead be a long chain of copying, translation, interpretation, and pattern matching. Each stage feels reasonable alone. Together they can create something the original scribe never intended. The wax lamp burns lower beside the tablets. Shadows deepen between the signs. A line copied centuries apart now appears almost continuous, though history has placed vast distances between its versions. The oldest warning survives. Its meaning survives less perfectly, and somewhere between ancient clay and modern expectation, time itself becomes part of the prophecy. The clay rests beneath a soft museum light, and for a moment the entire mystery seems almost manageable. 5 signs, 5 warnings, 5 steps arranged toward a modern date, yet the closer you look, the less tidy the pattern becomes. What appears at first like a single ancient sequence begins separating into fragments drawn from different kinds of omen traditions, each carrying its own history. You begin with the first question that any careful historian must ask. Were these 5 signs ever written together as one prophecy? The surviving evidence does not clearly support that claim. Mesopotamian scholars certainly recorded celestial disturbances, unusual weather, floods, political disorder, and strange movements in the heavens, but modern summaries often gather such themes into one convenient sequence. That sequence feels ancient because every ingredient is ancient. This arrangement may be modern. This distinction is subtle, yet crucial, Orumshes. Ancient omen collections frequently grouped related phenomena according to categories, months, directions, colours, locations, and possible consequences. A modern interpreter can therefore select several ominous themes and place them beside one another without technically inventing the individual elements. The new meaning emerges from the arrangement. You can imagine 5 clay fragments placed across a table. One refers to darkness in the heavens, another describes troubled waters, a third concerns movement among celestial bodies, a fourth mentions disorder in the land, a fifth speaks of authority being shaken. Individually, Each theme belongs comfortably inside Mesopotamian thought. Together, they begin to resemble a prophecy. That resemblance becomes stronger when modern events are placed beside them. An eclipse can be matched with celestial darkness. Flooding can be matched with overflowing waters. Political unrest can be matched with broken authority. An unusual planetary alignment can be interpreted as wandering lights converging. The human mind enjoys this kind of symmetry. It feels satisfying. Researchers at leading universities, including Oxford University and Yale University, have spent decades studying how omen texts were organised and interpreted. Their work shows that ancient divination was systematic, but systematic does not mean chronological. A list of omens was often a reference collection, not a timetable. That difference changes everything. Suppose an ancient medical text lists fever, coughing, weakness, and sleeplessness. You would not automatically assume the patient must experience those symptoms in that exact order. The text may simply classify possibilities. Omen literature can function similarly. One line may describe what an eclipse could mean, another may describe a storm, another may concern the appearance of a planet. Their proximity does not necessarily mean that one event must follow the next. Yet modern prophecy claims frequently depend on exactly that assumption. The first alleged sign often involves a darkened moon or a celestial shadow. This has genuine roots in Mesopotamian omen traditions because eclipses were treated seriously. The second frequently involves unusual planetary movement or lights approaching one another, another authentic ancient concern. Then the sequence becomes more terrestrial. Water leaves its expected boundaries. The natural world behaves strangely. Social order weakened dances These themes also appear broadly within ancient omen traditions, but not necessarily as 5 consecutive steps leading toward one final event. The modern reconstruction takes recurring Mesopotamian fears and turns them into stages. That transformation is where caution becomes necessary. You sit mentally beside an ancient scholar examining a tablet. He does not think in terms of a global apocalypse scheduled thousands of years ahead. His concerns are immediate and political. Will the king remain safe? Will crops survive? Will enemies attack? Will the river behave predictably? His world is local. His omens are often local too. A warning about the land may mean a kingdom, province, or city. A prediction concerning the king may refer to one specific ruler. A statement about famine may describe regional scarcity rather than worldwide catastrophe. Modern interpretation expands the spell. A local crisis becomes global disruption. A royal omen becomes a warning for civilization. A seasonal event becomes a marker on an international calendar. The process is understandable because modern audiences naturally translate ancient language into familiar categories, but the translation can silently add assumptions that never existed in the original text. One quirky modern tendency is to treat repeated numbers as hidden chronological keys. If 5 signs are identified, someone may assign them to 5 years, 5 celestial cycles, or 5 intervals between major events. The number itself begins carrying weight even when the ancient source never indicates such a calculation. Numbers feel authoritative. They create the appearance of precision. A date like 2026 sounds far more compelling than a phrase such as sometime during future disorder. Yet precision must come from evidence, not atmospheres. The same problem appears with 2027. Modern interpreters sometimes connect an alleged final warning with the year following a celestial or political marker. The calculation may involve planetary cycles, eclipse dates, rain lengths, or symbolic numbers. Each step can sound plausible when presented quickly. But plausibility is not proof. Scholars continue debating how much ancient omen traditions were meant to describe recurring patterns rather than unique future events. Some texts clearly respond to repeated celestial phenomena, others preserve hypothetical conditions, still others may reflect historical experiences that became templates for interpreting later events. This debate matters because a recurring pattern behaves very differently from a one-time prophecy. Imagine a river rising dangerously every generation. People remember. Imagine a ruler falling during a year of unusual celestial events. Scribes record the association. Generations later, similar signs appear again, and specialists consult the preserved tradition. The text is not necessarily forecasting one distant future crisis. It may be offering a framework for interpreting recurring uncertainty. That framework can feel prophetic because history often repeats conditions without repeating exact outcomes. You notice how easily the 5 signs begin fitting modern anxieties. The heavens appear unstable, waters behave unpredictably, weather grows extreme, political systems seem tense, public confidence weakens. The pattern feels almost too neat. That's precisely when caution matters most. Pattern recognition becomes strongest when the categories are broad enough to fit many periods. Ancient societies experienced eclipses, floods, droughts, wars, succession crises, and social unrest repeatedly. A set of warnings built from those themes can resemble almost any troubled century. It can resemble ours too. The fringe interpretation becomes appealing because it offers order inside confusion. Instead of disconnected crises, everything becomes part of one sequence. Instead of uncertainty, there is a map. Instead of coincidence, there is design. That emotional appeal should not be underestimated. People often prefer a frightening pattern to no pattern at all. A pattern promises meaning. Yet the historical record asks for patience. You return to the clay mentally, ignoring the dramatic modern labels. You see categories rather than countdowns. You see celestial omens, environmental warnings, political anxieties, and ritual responses developed across centuries. The 5 signs still matter. They simply matter differently. They reveal what ancient Mesopotamians feared most when order seemed fragile. Darkness above threatened kingship. Strange planetary behavior disturbed expectations. Water could nourish or destroy, weather could ruin harvests, social disorder could unravel everything built around palace, temple, family, and field. These concerns formed a system, not necessarily a Shanda. That distinction does not destroy the mystery, it makes it more human. You can understand why modern interpreters gather these themes together. They seem connected because ancient Mesopotamian thought itself connected heaven, land, ruler, weather, and society. Disorder in one realm could reflect disorder in another. The universe was imagined as an interdependent structure. If the moon darkened strangely, political consequences might follow. If storms behaved unusually, divine displeasure might be suspected. If rulers failed, cosmic imbalance could become part of the explanation. Modern readers inherit the pattern without always inheriting the worldview. That is where reinterpretation begins. The museum room grows quieter. Outside, traffic moves beneath electric lights. Satellites cross the sky, and weather reports update across countless screens. Yet inside the glass case sits a world where every unusual sign demanded attention. 5 modern warnings may not form one authentic ancient prophecy, but they do reveal 5 ancient fears. And when those fears are placed beside the present, the unsettling feeling comes not from certainty but from recognition. Cold air settles over the rooftops as the moon climbs higher, pale and steady above the river plain. You stand where the horizon remains wide, with no towers of glass and steel to interrupt the sky. The night feels enormous. Then the familiar brightness begins to change. almost imperceptibly at first, as a shadow touches one edge of the lunar disk. The change is slow enough to watch, or that slowness makes it unsettling. An eclipse does not arrive like lightning. It advances with calm precision, darkening something that people have trusted since childhood. The moon remains exactly where it should be, yet its appearance becomes strange. Its surface dims, then reddens, while the surrounding stars seem sharper against the deepened night. Ancient Mesopotamian scholars treated such moments with exceptional seriousness. Surviving omen traditions show that lunar eclipses could be analysed according to timing, direction, duration, and the portion of the moon covered by shadow. Each detail might alter the interpretation, especially when the safety of a ruler was believed to be involved. You imagine the observers measuring what they can. There are no modern clocks. Time can be estimated through water clocks, watches of the night, rising stars, and accumulated experience. Specialists note when darkness begins and how it moves across the moon. They compare the event with inherited categories and try to determine what kind of warning it might represent. Their concern is political as much as religious. Kingship stands at the centre of many Mesopotamian omen systems. A ruler is not merely an administrator collecting taxes and commanding soldiers. He occupies a position tied to divine favour, social stability, warfare, harvests, and ritual order. If the heavens appear disturbed, the king may be vulnerable. That belief becomes especially intense during eclipses. Records from later Mesopotamian courts confirm that scholars sent reports concerning lunar events directly to rulers. These reports could include interpretations and recommended protective measures. The scholars were not simply describing astronomy for curiosity, they were advising powers. A darkened moon could therefore trigger practical action. Messages travelled. Priests prepared rituals. Officials paid attention. One remarkable proactive custom involved the use of a substitute king when an omen was judged particularly dangerous. A temporary figure could be placed in a symbolic royal position while the actual king withdrew from the threatened role. The logic feels strange today. Within the omen system, it was almost elegant. If the warning targeted the king, then perhaps the identity occupying kingship could be altered until the dangerous period passed. Ritual specialists attempted to redirect fate by changing the relationship between sign and ruler. This detail reveals something easily missed in modern prophecy stories. Ancient warnings were not always understood as unavoidable future facts. They could function as alerts that allowed ritual responses, political precautions, or protective acts. The omen announced danger. It did not necessarily seal destiny. You watch the eclipse deepen. The moon becomes copper-coloured. Dust hangs faintly in the air, and the river below catches only a dim reflection. Somewhere in the city, conversations quiet as people look upward. The colour itself matters psychologically. A pale object has become red. Modern astronomy explains this through sunlight filtered and refracted by Earth's atmosphere. Ancient observers lacked that physical model, but they had centuries of experience with the phenomenon. Repeated observation allowed them to recognise patterns even without understanding orbital mechanics in modern terms. Researchers associated with institutions such as the University of Chicago and Oxford University have examined Mesopotamian eclipse records because they reveal remarkable continuity in astronomical observation. Some records are precise enough to help historians study chronology and the development of predictive techniques. Prediction, however, had two meanings. One involved anticipating when an eclipse might occur. The other involved interpreting what the eclipse might mean. Those two activities could coexist. A scholar might know that an eclipse follows regular celestial cycles and still believe that its appearance carries divine significance. Predictability did not automatically remove sacred meaning. This is crucial. Modern people often assume that once an event becomes scientifically predictable, it loses symbolic power. Ancient Mesopotamian thought did not require that separation. A scheduled celestial event could still matter because divine order itself was expected to operate through regular patterns. The sky could be lawful and meaningful at once. Your eyes adjust to the darkness. The stars seem brighter now. A dog barks repeatedly in the distance, and somewhere a gate creaks as someone steps outside to look. The city is not panicking, it is observing. That quieter reaction fits the evidence better than scenes of universal terror. Specialists existed precisely because unusual events required interpretation. Knowledge reduced uncertainty. Even when the conclusion remained ominous, the trained observer could tell the court whether a particular eclipse configuration was considered dangerous or relatively harmless. One quirky detail is that not every eclipse automatically threatened the local king. The direction of the shadow and other features could shift the omen towards another region or political rival. A frightening event could become good news. If the sign threatened an enemy, the same darkened moon might be interpreted favourably at home. Cosmic danger depended on perspective. That makes the system more political than mystical stereotypes often suggest. Geography mattered. Direction mattered. Rivalry mattered. An eclipse could be mapped onto a world of competing kingdoms. Scholars still debate how consistently these geographic associations were applied, and whether some interpretations developed through later scholarly systematization. The surviving texts preserve intricate correspondences, but determining how directly they reflect actual court practice remains complicated. The uncertainty itself is revealing. A written tradition can appear perfectly ordered on clay while real life remains messy. Kings change. Borders move. Observers disagree. Clouds obscure the sky. Reports arrive late. An eclipse may begin before anyone has fully prepared. Yet the system persists because it offers structure. That structure is one reason the darkened moon becomes such an appealing first sign in modern prophecy claims. Eclipses are real, visible, dramatic, and predictable. They provide a natural anchor for stories seeking a starting point. A modern interpreter can point to an eclipse occurring near a chosen year and say, "The ancient warning has begun." The event is undeniable. The interpretation remains uncertain. You feel the difference more clearly now. The moon itself does not contain a date written across its surface. It darkens according to the celestial mechanics. The ancient text supplies symbolic associations. The modern storyteller supplies the chronologies. 3 layers become fused. Astronomy, ancient interpretation, modern expectation. Once combined, they can feel like one prophecy. They're not necessarily the same thing. The eclipse reaches its deepest phase. For a while the moon hangs dimly above the landscape and transformed but not gone. That matters too. Ancient observers repeatedly witnessed darkness arriving and then receding. The moon returned. The expected brightness came back. Cosmic order appeared threatened, then restored. Perhaps that cycle gave eclipses part of their power. They demonstrated disruption without permanence. A warning entered the sky, remained visible for a time, then passed. You can imagine why rulers took such events seriously. Power itself behaves in similar ways. A dynasty appears stable until suddenly it does not. A border holds until it shifts. A harvest thrives until the rains fail. The moon becomes a mirror for uncertainty. Not because it predicts one particular catastrophe, but because it shows familiar order changing before your eyes. The first edge of brightness returns. A narrow silver curve appears where shadow had dominated. The city exhales almost imperceptibly. The eclipse has not explained anything. It has only presented a sign, and somewhere below, trained scholars begin deciding what that sign is allowed to mean. The palace is quieter than you expect. Oil lamps burn low along plastered walls. Guards stand near heavy doors, and the scent of cedar smoke lingers in the corridors. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, a messenger has arrived carrying a report from men who spent the night watching the sky. The king will hear what they have seen, because celestial danger can become political danger very quickly. Court scholars occupied an unusual position in Mesopotamian life. They were observers, interpreters, advisors, and sometimes protectors of royal authority. Their reports could include eclipses, planetary movements, weather signs, unusual births, and other phenomena believed to reveal changes within the divine order. A ruler depended on information. That information came with consequences. If an omen suggested danger to the throne, ignoring it could appear reckless. The king might order rituals, consult additional scholars, alter public appearances, postpone plans, or withdraw temporarily from a vulnerable position. Religion and government were closely intertwined, so protective action could be both spiritual and practical. You imagine a royal chamber at night. A scholar reads from a clay tablet while another waits beside him. The language is formal. The interpretation concerns the king directly. Perhaps an eclipse has appeared in a dangerous part of the sky, or a particular celestial configuration resembles an older warning preserved in scholarly tradition. The ruler listens carefully. He has armies. He has walls. He has wealth. Yet none of those things can command the moon. This imbalance gave celestial omens their peculiar force. Kings might dominate cities and provinces, but they remained vulnerable to signs that seemed to arrive from a higher level of authority. Royal power was therefore never completely secure. Mesopotamian political ideology often presented kingship as supported by divine approval. A successful ruler built temples, maintained justice, defended the land, and performed religious duties. If unusual signs appeared repeatedly, they could raise uncomfortable questions about whether cosmic favour remained stable. That concern encouraged elaborate responses. One of the strangest was the substitute king ritual. When certain omens threatened the monarch, specialists could arrange for another person to occupy the royal role temporarily. The true king stepped away from the dangerous identity, while the substitute took on royal clothing, titles, and ceremonial duties. It sounds almost like theatre. In ritual terms, it was serious. It was serious. The idea relied on a simple but powerful logic. If the omen targeted the king, then changing who occupied the role might redirect the danger. The threat could attach itself to the substitute instead of the actual monarch. The ritual transformed identity into protection. You picture the temporary ruler seated beneath royal symbols, knowing that his position is not truly his. Servants move around him. Ceremonies continue. The palace follows rules designed to convince the ritual system that kingship has changed hands. The real monarch remains elsewhere. He may adopt a humbler appearance. He may avoid certain ceremonies. He may communicate through trusted officials while waiting for the dangerous period to pass. Researchers at institutions including Yale University and the University of Chicago have examined surviving letters and ritual texts connected with these practices. The evidence shows that celestial divination could influence real decisions inside royal courts, not merely abstract religious speculation. That gives the omens practical weight. A sign in the sky could change schedules on Earth. Yet the substitute ritual also reveals how flexible fate could be. If a warning were understood as completely fixed, no ritual would matter. Protective ceremonies only make sense if signs indicate possibilities that human action can still influence. The future remains negotiable. That idea sits at the heart of much Mesopotamian divination. A warning does not simply tell the king what will happen, it tells him what might happen if nothing is done. The entire system therefore creates a space between observation and outcome. That space is filled with ritual, You hear sandals moving across a stone floor. A priest enters carrying water, incense, and prepared objects. Another recites formulas. Every action is deliberate. The ritual does not need to look spectacular to feel significant. Its power comes from correct procedure. Ancient courts were deeply concerned with correctness. Words mattered. Timing mattered. Purity mattered. A mistake could undermine protection. This concern explains why scholarly specialists were valuable. They preserved technical knowledge that ordinary people did not possess. A king could not simply improvise a response to an eclipse. He needed men trained in established traditions. Their authority came from literacy. It also came from continuity. A scholar might cite an old omen describing what happened under a previous ruler. Historical memory strengthened the warning. If a similar sign once preceded political disaster, ignoring it now might seem foolish. This is where interpretation and memory begin to merge. Humans remember dramatic coincidences. A king dies near the time of an eclipse, and the event becomes memorable. Another ruler survives an eclipse without consequence, and the association may receive less attention. Over generations, selective memory can help strengthen symbolic patterns. Scholars continue debating how much actual historical correlation shaped omen traditions. Some interpretations may reflect remembered events, while others may arise from symbolic systems developed independently of specific outcomes. Both possibilities can coexist. A tradition does not need statistical accuracy to become politically powerful. It only needs authority. The court believes the experts understand the signs. The experts possess texts older than living memory. The king understands that his subjects may also interpret unusual events as meaningful. That last point matters. An eclipse is visible to everyone. If the heavens seem to threaten the ruler, public confidence could become fragile. Ritual action therefore protects more than the king's body. It protects the image of political order. A ruler who responds correctly demonstrates competence. He is not helpless. He is acting. That may have been psychologically reassuring even when the danger remained uncertain. One quirky feature of royal divination is that scholars could disagree. Different specialists might interpret an omen differently, especially when the evidence was incomplete or the celestial event behaved unexpectedly. The king could receive competing opinions. Imagine the frustration. One advisor sees danger. Another sees only limited concern. A third recommends ritual precautions anyway. The situation suddenly feels modern. Expert interpretation remains complicated whenever uncertain evidence meets political pressure. Mesopotamian kings had to decide whom to trust. They also had to decide how much caution was enough. Too little events could seem careless. Too much could disrupt government and reveal fear. Ritual specialists therefore operated within a delicate balance between cosmic concern and practical rule. The palace reflects that tension. Outside, officials continue collecting taxes and managing supplies, soldiers patrol gates, merchants negotiate, farmers worry about irrigation. Inside, the king waits for the heavens to become ordinary again. The substitute sits beneath borrowed symbols. The ritual calendar moves forward. Nothing dramatic may happen. That may be considered success. When the dangerous interval finally ends, the true monarch can return to public authority, the throne is restored, court ceremonies resume, the crisis passes into memory. Yet one uncomfortable question remains. Did the ritual prevent disaster, or was disaster forecoming? Ancient diviners could not easily answer that. Neither can modern historians. The absence of catastrophe can always be interpreted as evidence that protection worked. This gives ritual systems remarkable resilience, because the success and failure can both receive explanations. The king survives. The ritual is praised. The king suffers. Perhaps the ritual was performed incorrectly, or the omen was stronger than expected. The system adapted. That adaptability helps explain why celestial divination endured across centuries. You stand beneath the palace roof while morning approaches. The eastern sky begins to pale, and the stars disappear one by one. The king remains alive. The city continues its routines. For everyone outside the court, the night may have passed normally. Inside the palace, it has been a negotiation with fate. The most powerful man in the kingdom has spent hours hiding from a shadow. And for a civilization that believed order could be disturbed from above, that was not weakness. The sky is clear enough that every bright object seems unusually close. You stand above a sleeping city while two luminous points hang near one another in the eastern darkness. They are not stars in the ordinary sense. They shift against the fixed constellation, slowly changing position from night to night. Ancient observers noticed this difference with remarkable patience. The bright wanderers did not remain fixed within familiar star patterns, and their movements seemed to follow complicated rhythms. Sometimes they approached one another. Sometimes one disappeared into sunlight. Sometimes a planet reversed its apparent direction and seemed to move backward. Such behavior demanded interpretation. In Mesopotamian scholarly tradition, planets were associated with powerful divine figures and political meanings. Their appearances could therefore be read as signals concerning rulers, rival kingdoms, harvest conditions, warfare, or changes in authority. A close approach between bright planets might attract particular attention because the heavens appeared to bring distinct powers into temporary relationship. You watch the two lights carefully. They move so slowly that nothing seems to happen. Yet that is precisely why trained observation matters. A casual viewer sees two beautiful points in the darkness. A professional observer remembers where they stood yesterday, where they appeared last a month, and whether older records describe a similar configuration. Memory becomes measure mind. Records confirm that Mesopotamian scholars kept systematic accounts of planetary positions across long periods. These observations eventually contributed to sophisticated methods for predicting celestial behavior. Research connected with institutions such as Brown University and Oxford University has shown how deeply mathematical astronomy developed within later Babylonian scholarship. The achievement is easy to underestimate. No telescope magnifies the planets. No mechanical clock measures the night. No computer calculates orbital paths. Instead, generations of observers build knowledge from repetition. Venus becomes particularly important because of its brilliance and striking appearances near sunrise and sunset. Mars attracts attention with its reddish colour. Jupiter moves slowly and prominently. Saturn requires even greater patience because its path unfolds across long spans of time. Each planet acquires character. That character is partly astronomical. It is also symbolic. A bright object disappearing unexpectedly may suggest absence or withdrawal. A planet emerging strongly from solar glare may suggest renewed power. Two objects drawing close may resemble alliance, confrontation, or transfer of influence. The sky becomes political theatre. This does not mean ancient scholars simply invented meanings at random. Their interpretations operated inside inherited systems containing directional associations, divine identities, regional correspondences, and established omen formulas. A configuration had context. The same pair of planets could be interpreted differently depending on where they appeared, how bright they seemed, which planet approached the other, and what additional celestial events occurred nearby. Complexity and vested authority. The more variables a specialist considered, the more necessary his expertise became. You can imagine the report reaching a palace. A scholar notes that a particular planet has drawn near another. He compares the event with older texts, then explains what the configuration may indicate for the ruler or his enemies. The king does not see geometry. He sees consequence. A planetary meeting could therefore become part of political conversation. If the omen favoured the local kingdom, confidence might rise. If it suggested danger, ritual specialists could recommend protective measures or caution. One curious feature of this system is that celestial events could sometimes be interpreted competitively. A configuration harmful to one land might benefit another. Cosmic meaning was not necessarily universal. The heavens had geography. Direction could point towards specific regions. A planetary sign in one section of the sky might be associated with one political territory, while another direction corresponded with a rival land. The night therefore became a map where astronomy and diplomacy overlapped. Scholars continued debating how consistently these geographic correspondences were applied in practice. Surviving texts preserve detailed schemes, yet real observations rarely behave as neatly as categories on clay. Clouds interfere, brightness varies, timing becomes uncertain. Different scholars may classify the same appearance differently. Still, the structure remains impressive. You hear the faint squeak of sandals behind you as another observer joins the rooftop. He carries a small lamp, shielding its flame from the wind. Together the scholars compare the planets against familiar star groups. One points toward the horizon, the other waits. Patience is their instrument. A modern observer can check an astronomical calculation instantly. The ancient scholar must know the sky through repeated exposure. He develops an intimate relationship with rising points, seasonal constellations, and the slow drift of planets. That intimacy changes perception. The sky stops being scenery. It becomes data. This is where modern prophecy claims find especially fertile ground. Planetary conjunctions are visually striking, mathematically predictable, and easy to assign symbolic meaning. When several occur near a chosen period, they can be presented as evidence that an ancient warning is unfolding. The difficulty lies in abundance. Planetary meetings are not unique to one generation. They recur because planets follow regular orbital cycles. Some conjunctions are common, others are rarer. Nearly every century contains visually impressive configurations. A modern interpreter therefore faces a choice. Which conjunction counts? Which planets matter? How close must they appear? What date should be treated as significant? The answer often depends on the story already being built. That is how interpretation can move backward from conclusion to evidence. You decide what period seems important, then search the sky for a fitting event. Because the heavens are always moving, something unusual can often be found. This does not make celestial cycles meaningless. It makes them flexible. A fringe theory sometimes claims that ancient Mesopotamian scholars possessed hidden knowledge of extremely long planetary cycles beyond anything preserved in ordinary texts. According to such claims, special conjunctions were secretly tied to distant future political transformations. The surviving evidence does not require that explanation. The genuine achievement is remarkable enough. Ancient observers tracked celestial rhythms across generations and gradually recognized regularities that allowed increasingly accurate prediction. Their success emerged from disciplined observation and mathematical development, not from mysterious access to modern dates. You let your eyes adjust further. The two planets remain close. One appears slightly brighter. The city below is almost silent except for water moving through a nearby canal. Somewhere beyond the walls, a donkey shifts against its tether. The whole scene feels calm. Yet a court scholar may see tension. He knows that closeness in the sky can be translated into closeness among powers. A planet associated with royal authority approaching another may become a symbolic encounter between kingdoms, gods, or political fortunes. The interpretation carries emotional force because movement is visible. Nothing needs to fall from the sky. Nothing needs to explode. The slow approach is enough. That quietness suits omen thinking particularly well. The most important sign may not be violent. It may unfold gradually, night after night, until trained observers realize the expected arrangement has changed. A ruler hearing the report might never look upward himself. Still, decisions could follow. This is the hidden power of specialists. They transform distant light into earthly meaning. A pair of planets becomes a warning. A direction becomes a territory. Brightness becomes strength. Disappearance becomes danger. Return becomes renewal. The system feels coherent because every celestial feature can be woven into political language. Modern audiences perform a similar transformation when unusual alignments are linked with economic crises, elections, wars, or environmental events. The vocabulary changes, but the desire for correspondence remains familiar. You want the sky to explain the ground. You want distant motion to reveal hidden order. And perhaps that desire is stronger when history feels uncertain. The planets drift westward as the night advances. Their apparent closeness will not last forever. Soon they will separate, continuing along paths governed by predictable celestial mechanics. For the ancient observer, however, their temporary meeting has already mattered. It has been seen. It has been recorded. And once light becomes a sign, the distance between heaven and politics becomes very small. The tablet before you is covered not with prophecy, but numbers. Columns of signs march across the clay in ordered rows, recording intervals and positions and repeating relationships. At first glance, it looks far less mysterious than a warning about kings or eclipses. Yet this quiet mathematics may be one of the most extraordinary achievements preserved from ancient Mesopotamia. You imagine a scholar leaning close to the clay. His fingers are stained with dust, and the lamp beside him gives off the faint scent of burning oil. He is not searching for a dramatic vision. He is comparing observations collected over years, perhaps even generations, looking for patterns hidden inside celestial motion. The night sky has become arithmetic. Babylonian scholars developed mathematical methods capable of predicting certain planetary and lunar phenomena with impressive accuracy. Their work rested on long traditions of observation, but eventually they learned that repeated motion could be represented numerically. Instead of watching every event as if it were completely new, they could calculate when similar patterns might return. This changed the intellectual landscape. A planet that once seemed unpredictable could be understood through recurring intervals. The moon could be tracked through cycles. Eclipses could be anticipated with increasing confidence. Repetition itself became evidence that the heavens followed order. Researchers connected with Brown University, Yale University, and Oxford University have examined surviving mathematical tablets that reveal sophisticated astronomical procedures. These scholars have shown that Mesopotamian astronomers were not merely recording unusual events. They were developing abstract systems for calculating motion. You feel the scale of that achievement slowly. There are no telescopes. There are no electronic instruments. There are no bruted tables. There are only eyes, memory, clay, reeds, and extraordinary persistence. A trained observer watches Jupiter over many years. Another records the moon. Someone else copies older data. Eventually the numbers become more useful than a single observation, because they preserve relationships across time. One evening matters. A century matters more. The scribal tradition becomes something like a collective mind extending beyond individual lifetimes. No single scholar needs to witness every cycle personally. He inherits the measurements of people long dead and adds his own observations to the growing structure. That accumulation creates predictive power. A pattern repeating every few months or years can be recognized. A more complicated cycle may require several generations of records. Once identified, however, the relationship can be transformed into a numerical scheme. This is where ancient astronomy begins feeling unexpectedly modern. Not because the scholars possessed modern physics. They did not. But because they searched for regularity. They measured, they compared, they calculated. One famous class of Babylonian astronomical text contains columns of numbers representing changing values over time. Scholars discovered that some of these procedures describe planetary motion using mathematical techniques that resemble geometric reasoning. The discovery surprised modern historians of science. For centuries, many assumed that advanced mathematical treatment of celestial motion emerged much later in the Mediterranean world. Yet Mesopotamian tablets revealed an independent tradition of numerical astronomy that had reached remarkable sophistication. The clay had been more intelligent than the people expected. You picture a line scratched onto a billet. One number rises. Another falls. The sequence creates a pattern. The scholar understands that planetary speed, or at least its apparent movement across the sky, can be represented through changing quantities. He may not describe gravity or orbital ellipses, but he can still predict where the planet is likely to appear. That is a powerful distinction. Prediction does not require complete explanation. You can predict sunrise without knowing the structure of the solar system. You can anticipate a season from experience without understanding atmospheric physics. Mesopotamian scholars pushed this principle much further by turning observation into calculation. The heavens became computables. There is a quirky beauty in their number system. Mesopotamian mathematics commonly used a base built around 60 rather than 10. Traces of that ancient preference remain embedded in modern timekeeping and angular measurement. 60 minutes form an hour. 60 seconds form a minute. A circle contains 360 degrees. The distant echo is still with you. That survival does not mean every modern convention came directly and simply from one ancient tablet, but it reveals how durable certain mathematical traditions can become. Systems created for administration and astronomy can outlive the civilizations that developed them. Numbers travel route. Prophecies travel differently. A mathematical cycle can be checked against observation. If the prediction fails repeatedly, the procedure can be adjusted. An omen, however, can remain flexible because meaning depends on interpretation. This creates a fascinating tension. The same scholar might calculate an eclipse accurately and then interpret that eclipse symbolically. To a modern mind, those activities seem opposed. To him, they're compatible. Knowing when a celestial event will occur does not remove its meaning. If the heavens follow divine order, then regularity may strengthen the sense that the cosmos operates according to an intelligible system. Order becomes sacred. Scholars still debate how tightly mathematical astronomy and divinatory practice were connected in everyday scholarly life. Some tablets are clearly computational, others focus on interpretation. The same intellectual communities may have participated in both traditions, but the exact relationship changed over time. That uncertainty matters. It prevents a simple story in which science suddenly replaces omen reading. The transition was slower. Knowledge overlapped. Methods coexisted. A scholar could calculate one phenomenon, observe another, and consult omen traditions for meaning without feeling any contradiction. You hear the quiet tapping of a reed stylus against clay. A calculation is being copied. The scribe checks the numbers carefully because one mistake can distort everything that follows. A misplaced value may shift a predicted position or corrupt a table used by another scholar. Precision becomes practical. That precision also creates temptation for modern interpreters. If ancient Mesopotamians could calculate celestial cycles, perhaps, some argue, they could project them thousands of years forward. From there, it becomes easy to imagine hidden dates corresponding with modern years, such as 2026 or 2027. The leap sounds impressive. The evidence is weaker. Ancient astronomical calculation focused largely on recurring celestial phenomena, relevant to the scholar's own intellectual traditions. Projecting those systems into distant modern dates is mathematically possible in some cases, but that does not prove ancient scribes attach prophetic importance to those dates. Calculation is not intention. This distinction is essential. A modern researcher can take an ancient planetary cycle and extend it forward with modern tools. The resulting date may be accurate astronomically, yet the ancient tablet may never have claimed that the distant occurrence carried a special warning. The date comes from modern projection. The significance comes from modern interpretation. The ancient mathematics sits quietly between them. One fringe idea suggests that hidden numerical codes were deliberately embedded inside astronomical tables, waiting to reveal future political or environmental events. Such theories are attractive because numbers appear objective, and objective-looking patterns can make speculation feel scientific. But numbers can be selected creatively. Choose one cycle, ignore another. Start counting from one royal reign. Shift the starting point. Combine several intervals. Soon almost any desired date and port can emerge. This is not uniquely ancient. Modern numerology often works through the same flexibilities. The danger lies in confusing mathematical possibility with historical evidence. You return your attention to the clay. The real achievement needs no hidden code. A community of scholars observed the sky for generations and discovered that motion could be translated into numbers. They built predictive techniques from patience, continuity, and discipline comparison. That story is quieter than prophecy. It is also more astonishing. The scholar beside you finishes a calculation and looks toward the open roof. Somewhere above the darkness, a planet sits almost exactly where his numbers suggested it would appear. For a moment, mathematics and heaven agree. No thunder follows. No king falls. Nothing dramatic happens. Yet something profound has taken place. Human beings have discovered that part of the future can be calculated. And once the idea enters history, prophecy itself begins to change. The river looks peaceful from a distance. Moonlight rests on its surface, and reeds sway gently along the bank while insects pulse in the warm darkness. Yet anyone living in ancient Mesopotamia knows that this calm is temporary. Water gives life to the fields, but it can also rise beyond expectation, break through embankments, swallow crops, and turn familiar ground into a moving brown plain. You stand near an irrigation canal as workers inspect a mud wall by lamplight. Their hands press damp earth into weak places, strengthening the barrier before the current grows stronger. The smell of wet clay mixes with river plants and smoke. Nothing about the scene feels mythical. This is labour shaped by fear and experience. Mesopotamian civilization depended on folior. The great river systems made large-scale agriculture possible across landscapes where rainfall could be unreliable. Communities dug canals, redirected channels, built embankments, and organised labour to move water toward fields, grain harvests, livestock, taxation, and urban food supplies all depended on careful control. The system was powerful. It was also fragile. Too little water could destroy crops. Too much could damage settlements and fields. A blocked canal might leave one district dry while another drowned. Silt accumulated, channels shifted, embankments failed. Water demanded constant attention. Records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm that irrigation management occupied officials, landowners, temple institutions, and local communities. Administrative tablets preserve allocations, field measurements, labour obligations, and disputes connected with agricultural production. That practical evidence matters. It shows that concern about rivers was not simply religious symbolism. Flood and drought were immediate political problems. A ruler who could maintain canals supported prosperity. A ruler who failed might face shortage, migration, unrest, and accusations of poor leadership. Control of water therefore became part of control of society. You hear shovels cutting into damp soil. Workers move slowly along the canal wall. One man carries a basket of earth on his shoulder, while another clears reeds from an outlet. Their task appears ordinary, but the survival of entire neighbourhoods may depend on these small repairs. The river never negotiates. It follows terrain, pressure, season, and chance. Ancient people learned to live beside that uncertainty. This helps explain why environmental disorder became such a powerful theme in omen traditions. If water behaved strangely, people did not view the event as abstract climate data. They experienced it through hunger, damaged houses, dead animals, lost fields, and rising food prices. An unusual river could become a warning. The warning felt personal. Imagine waking before dawn to hear shouting outside. You open a wooden door and feel cold water touching your feet. The lane that was dry yesterday now reflects the sky. Neighbours carry baskets towards higher ground. Children are lifted onto rooftops. A granary door is being reinforced. The flood does not need to be enormous to transform daily life. Even moderate disruption can ruin stored grain or delay planting. The ancient landscape contained many opportunities for such problems. River channels could migrate over time, abandoning one settlement while threatening another. Irrigation increased agricultural productivity but also required maintenance across generations. When political systems weakened, neglected canals could create additional stress. Researchers from universities, including the University of Chicago and Yale University, have studied ancient settlement patterns, environmental change, and irrigation networks across Mesopotamia. Their work shows that shifts in water systems could influence where people lived and how communities adapted. The relationship was never simple. Environment did not control history by itself. Politics mattered. Technology mattered. Labour organisation mattered. War mattered. A damaged canal during peace could be repaired quickly. The same failure during conflict might remain neglected. A drought under stable government might be managed through storage and redistribution, while the same drought during political fragmentation could become disastrous. Scholars continue debating how strongly climate events contributed to particular episodes of Mesopotamian collapse or migration. Some researchers emphasize prolonged drought and environmental stress. Others warn that societies respond differently depending on institutions, trade, inequality, and political resilience. That disagreement is important. Nature creates pressure. Human systems determine much of what follows. This distinction becomes easy to lose in modern prophecy stories. A tablet mentioning disturbed waters can be presented as if it predicts one specific global flood or one precise environmental crisis, ancient language. However, often emerges from societies where water instability was common enough to inspire constant concern. The omen does not need a distant future to feel frightening. Its audience already understands the danger. You can sense that knowledge in the architecture. Buildings are made from mud brick because the material is abundant, walls can be rebuilt, courtyards are raised, storage rooms protect food, settlements adapt repeatedly to shifting conditions. Life becomes a negotiation with mud. A quirky detail appears in some ancient legal traditions, where responsibility for neglected water infrastructure could carry serious consequences. If someone failed to maintain an embankment and neighbouring fields were damaged, the problem was not treated as mere bad luck. Responsibility could be assigned. That detail reveals something deeply practical beneath the religious worldview. People might interpret floods symbolically, but they also blame poor maintenance. Divine meaning and human negligence could exist together. You hear water striking the canal wall harder now. The current has strengthened. A worker presses his palm against the wet surface and calls another man closer. They bring baskets of earth and begin reinforcing the weaker section. Nobody waits for prophecy. They repair the wall. This contrast matters. Ancient societies did not simply surrender to omens. They built systems, issued regulations, stored grain, organised labour, and modified landscapes. Religious interpretation coexisted with engineering. The rivers demanded both. A flood warning could therefore carry several meanings at once. It might be a physical danger. It might be a political test. It might be interpreted as divine displeasure. It might reveal administrative failure. Modern audiences often prefer one explanation. Ancient reality was more layered. That complexity makes the alleged third sign, waters leaving their boundaries, especially seductive today. Flood imagery is universal. Nearly every generation witnesses rivers overflowing somewhere, coastlines suffering storms, or rainfall overwhelming settlements. The image feels immediately prophetic. But frequency creates a problem. If a warning is broad enough to include any major flood, it can appear fulfilled repeatedly. One year brings destructive monsoon rains. Another brings river flood. Another brings coastal storms. Another brings unusual drought instead. Each event can be fitted into the language of disturbed waters. The sign never lacks candidates. That does not make environmental danger imaginary. It makes prophetic identification difficult. A specific prediction requires specific evidence. Location matters. Timing matters. Scale matters. Cause matters. Without those limits, almost any troubled season can be presented as fulfillment. You walk closer to the river. The bank feels cool beneath your feet. Small waves break against reeds, carrying bits of plant matter downstream. The water looks harmless under the stars, yet you know how quickly its meaning can change. A river inside its banks is prosperity. A river beyond them is fear. A river that fails to rise can be equally dangerous. The ancient world understood this balance with painful intimacy. Perhaps that is why water appears so often in stories about judgment, renewal, destruction, and survival. It nourishes civilization while constantly reminding civilization that control is incomplete. No king owns the river completely. No wall lasts forever. No harvest is guaranteed. The workers finish reinforcing the canal edge and step back. For now, the barrier holds. Water continues past them into the darkness, carrying silt toward fields that will depend on it when morning comes. The danger has not disappeared. It has been managed. And that may be the most revealing truth inside the warning about waters leaving their boundaries. The ancient fear was never simply that water would rise. It was that the systems holding ordinary life together might fail at the same moment. The smell changes first, wet earth replaces dust, and the air feels heavier against your skin as clouds gather beyond the flat horizon. You stand near a settlement built beside channels that have nourished fields for generations, yet the people around you are watching the water with unusual attention. Older men remember previous seasons. Younger workers listen to them closely. Somewhere in that shared memory, practical experience begins turning into story. Mesopotamia preserved some of the oldest known flood traditions in human literature. These stories appear in several forms, written at different times and shaped by different communities. Their details vary, yet they share a haunting idea. A devastating flood overwhelms the ordinary world. A chosen survivor is warned, and life continues only because someone prepares before the waters arrive. The story feels enormous. Its roots may be more complicated. Archaeologists excavating ancient Mesopotamian cities have found evidence that individual settlements sometimes experienced major flooding. Layers of deposited silt appear at certain sites, though they do not all date to the same moment. This matters because the archaeological record does not reveal one simple flood layer covering every city at once. Instead, the landscape preserves many disasters. A river changes course. A levee breaks. Seasonal water rises farther than expected. A settlement becomes uninhabitable. For the people living through such an event, the disaster does not need to cover the entire world. Their city, fields, temples, relatives, livestock, and stored food may already represent nearly everything they know. Local destruction can feel universal. You picture survivors returning after the water retreats. Mud covers rooms, walls have collapsed, dead reeds and branches cling to rooftops, familiar boundaries have vanished beneath layers of silt. People begin cleaning. They also begin remembering. Memory rarely preserves disaster as a simple measurement. It preserves fear, loss, survival, strange details, warnings that were ignored, and the names of people who escaped. Over generations, those memories can grow. An unusually destructive flood becomes the flood. A survivor becomes the survivor. A boat becomes a vessel carrying the future. Historical memory transforms experience into pattern. Scholars at institutions such as the University of Chicago and Oxford University have studied the relationship between Mesopotamian flood stories and archaeological evidence. Their work has encouraged a cautious conclusion. Real floods almost certainly shape the cultural imagination, but identifying one single historical event behind every surviving story remains difficult. The debate continues because literature is not a river gauge. Stories select meaning. They combine memory with theology. They reshape events into questions about human behavior, divine decisions, survival, and the fragile boundary between order and chaos. You can hear that boundary in the oldest narratives. The world is inhabited. Cities exist. People work. Then something changes. The waters come. This structure remains powerful because it begins with normality. Catastrophe does not arrive in an empty landscape. It interrupts routines people assumed would continue. A family prepares grain. A merchant checks a shipment. A priest enters a temple. Someone repairs a roof. Then rain or rising water makes every ordinary plan irrelevant. That abrupt shift gives the flood stories their emotional force. One unusual feature of Mesopotamian tradition is that different texts explain the catastrophe differently. Divine decisions vary, or the identity of the survivor changes. The reasons for destruction are not always identical. This variation is valuable. It shows that the tradition developed rather than descending unchanged from one original version. A story can solve precisely because people keep retelling it. Each retelling emphasizes what matters to a new audience. One version may focus on divine anger. Another may emphasize human noise or disturbance. Another may concentrate on wisdom, warning, and preservation. The flood becomes a container for many anxieties. You stand beneath a sky that has turned almost black. Wind moves through the reeds. The first drops strike the packed ground, leaving dark circles in the dust. People nearby hurry toward their houses. The scene feels familiar because storms remain part of human experience. Yet ancient communities possess fewer buffers against sudden environmental disruption. There were no international relief agencies, no satellite forecasts, and no mechanized pumps capable of moving enormous quantities of water. Preparation depended on local knowledge. Storage mattered. Elevation mattered. Boats mattered. Community organisation mattered. That practical background may help explain why the survivor in flood traditions is often warned to prepare rather than simply rescued at the final moment. Survival begins with listening. The warning arrives. Materials are gathered. Food is protected. A vessel is constructed. The story turns preparation into wisdom. This is where flood memory intersects with omen thinking in a particularly subtle way. A warning only becomes useful if it arrives before disaster. The purpose of recognizing a sign is not merely to admire its accuracy afterward. The sign demands response. That principle makes few traditions emotionally compatible with prophecy. You do not want to know that disaster happened. You want to know whether it can be recognized in time. This desire remains powerful today. Modern audiences looking at drought maps, river levels, storms, and changing rainfall patterns often feel a similar tension. Information arrives constantly, yet uncertainty remains. Some warnings prove accurate, others shift as conditions change. People ask the ancient question in modern language: how much warning is enough? A fringe idea occasionally suggests that Mesopotamian flood stories preserve memories of a single civilization, ending catastrophe far older than known urban society. The theory is appealing because it transforms scattered traditions into evidence of one forgotten global event. The archaeological record does not require that conclusion. Multiple floods across river settlements offer a simpler explanation, yet the persistence of the larger story remains fascinating. Perhaps communities combine memories from many local catastrophes into one overwhelming narrative. Perhaps unusual and severe regional flooding left a deeper cultural scar. Perhaps older oral traditions have contributed material that can no longer be reconstructed. The surviving evidence does not force one answer. That uncertainty gives the story its long shadow. You listen as rain strengthens. Water begins running through narrow channels beside the houses. People pull baskets indoors. A child laughs at first, enjoying the sudden coolness, while adults glance toward the river. Their expressions are more careful. They understand how quickly pleasure can become danger. This emotional shift may be one of the oldest human experiences in flood country. Rain brings life. Rain can also become threat. The same water carries opposite meanings. Blessing and destruction are separated only by scale. That ambiguity helps explain why flood stories became powerful religious narratives. Water can erase human boundaries, yet it can also allow renewal. Fields buried beneath fresh silt may become fertile again. Communities rebuild. The world continues. This makes the flood more than a story of punishment. It becomes a story of continuity through collapse. A survivor preserves life. Knowledge crosses the disaster. Seeds are planted again. Cities rise again. Humanity does what humanity always does. It begins rebuilding among ruins. Scholars still disagree about how directly environmental events should be connected with literary traditions. Some emphasize the obvious importance of river flooding in Mesopotamian life. Others caution that literary narratives develop according to cultural and religious needs, not simply physical events. Both perspectives illuminate something important. The flood is historical possibility. It is also symbolic memory. Those categories do not cancel each other. A real disaster can become a sacred story can preserve traces of lived experience. The transformation does not make either side meaningless. It makes interpretation difficult. The storm begins to pass. Clouds move eastward. Water gathers in shallow pools between buildings, reflecting small pieces of returning sky. People emerge cautiously and inspect the streets. Nothing catastrophic has happened. Not this time. Yet the story remains ready. Every generation living near dangerous water inherits both the river and the memory of what the river can do. Perhaps this is why ancient flood traditions still feel prophetic. They describe no distant mystery. They describe a permanent condition of civilization. Human beings build beside the forces that sustain them, knowing those same forces can exceed every boundary they create. The warning is old because the danger is old. And every time the waters begin to rise, memory rises with them. The wind arrives before the storm. It moves along the plain in a low rush, lifting dust from pathways and sending loose reeds trembling against canal banks. You feel grit against your face. Then the temperature changes, suddenly cooler beneath the ceiling of dark cloud. In the distance, thunder rolls across the horizon with enough depth to make the mud brick walls seem briefly smaller. Ancient Mesopotamian observers treated disturbances in weather with the same seriousness they gave unusual events in the heavens. Thunder, violent winds, sudden darkness, lightning, strange clouds, and unexpected seasonal conditions could all become part of a wider language of warning. The natural world was expected to follow patterns, and anything that broke those expectations invited interpretation. This expectation matters. A storm in the proper season may be ordinary. A storm arriving strangely can become meaningful. The same principle applies to heat, cold, wind direction, dust and rainfall. A phenomenon becomes ominous not because it is dramatic, but because it appears outside the rhythm people have learned to trust. You can imagine a scholar standing beneath a sheltered doorway while rain begins striking the courtyard. He listens to the direction of thunder. He watches the clouds. He notes how long the disturbance lasts and compares it with inherited descriptions. The sky becomes evidence again. Records confirm that Mesopotamian omen traditions included extensive attention to weather and atmospheric events. Scholars working through these collections have shown how carefully unusual conditions were categorized according to direction, timing, sequence, and possible consequence. The system is broader than astronomy. It reaches downward into the air people breathe. A strong wind might carry implications for agriculture or politics. Thunder from a certain quarter could be interpreted in relation to a particular land. Sudden darkness at an unexpected hour might encourage concern. Even the appearance of clouds could become significant if their form seemed unusual enough. This is not difficult to understand. Human beings are highly sensitive to weather. You notice pressure changes. You hear branches moving. You smell rain before it arrives. You recognize the difference between ordinary heat and oppressive heat. Ancient communities depended on these distinctions far more directly because weather could determine the success of food production with brutal speed. A failed season affects more than farmers. It reaches markets. It reaches temples. It reaches the police. Prices change. Rations shrink. Arguments begin. Weather moves quietly into politics. That relationship helps explain why environmental signs could carry political meaning. A king was expected to preside over order. When nature behaved unpredictably, people might wonder whether the disorder reflected a larger instability. The connection was symbolic, but its consequences were practical. You hear thunder again. This time it comes closer. Rain begins falling in large drops that darken the packed ground one circle at a time. Within moments, the courtyard shines under the storm. A servant runs to cover grain. Another closes a wooden shutter. Someone laughs nervously at the sudden change. The storm is ordinary enough, yet an observer trained to detect signs will notice details others ignore. One quirky feature of ancient omen literature is how much meaning could be assigned to direction. North, south, east, and west were not merely points on a map. They could carry associations with specific regions, powers, or outcomes. A storm therefore had orientation. Thunder from one direction might suggest trouble for one land. Thunder from another could shift the warning elsewhere. Weather becomes geography written in sound. Scholars continue debating how consistently such directional interpretations reflected actual observation, rather than highly structured scholarly classification. Some omen collections may record genuine events, while others appear to explore theoretical possibility within an organised system. That distinction is difficult to recover. The tablets preserve the categories. They do not preserve every conversation. You cannot always know whether a particular line began with a storm someone actually witnessed, or whether a scholar created it to complete a pattern inside a reference text. The uncertainty is important. It reminds you that ancient systems often aim for completeness. If thunder could come from 4 directions, a scholar might want rules for all 4. If clouds could appear in several forms, each form might receive an interpretation. A modern reader could mistake this completeness for a sequence of disasters. But a catalogue is not necessarily a chronology. Still, the emotional force remains. Imagine living through several unusual events close together. A strange wind arrives. Then an earthquake is reported. Then the sky darkens with dust. Then storms damage crops. Even if each event has a natural explanation, the accumulation can feel unsettling. People begin searching for connection. This response is deeply human. Modern science recognizes that earthquakes and storms, atmospheric dust, and climate variations arise from different physical processes. Ancient observers lacked those divisions. The world could therefore appear more unified, with disturbance in one realm reflecting disturbance in another. Earth and sky belonged to one order. When both seemed troubled, the meaning intensified. Earthquakes were especially disturbing because they transform the most stable part of existence into motion. The ground is supposed to hold still. Walls rely on that assumption. So do temples, houses, storehouses, and human bodies. Then suddenly the earth moves. You feel it in your imagination first as a faint vibration beneath your feet. A hanging object shifts. Dust falls from a wall. Someone pauses. Then the movement strengthens. Clay bricks creak against one another. Animals react. People step into open spaces. The shaking passes quickly. The silence afterward feels different from the silence before. No omen needs exaggeration when the ground itself has moved. Ancient Mesopotamia was not the most intensely seismic region of the ancient Near East. Yet earthquakes were known across the broader region and entered systems of interpretation. Reports of trembling earth could become signs of political change or divine displeasure. Again, the important element is the violated expectation. Stable ground becomes unstable. Clear sky becomes dark. Seasonal weather arrives at the wrong time. The ordinary order loses reliability. This is why the alleged 4th sign, disturbance between earth and sky, feels so compelling in modern retellings. The phrase is broad enough to gather storms, earthquakes, unusual temperatures, dust events, strange clouds, and other environmental disruptions into one category. That breadth creates emotional power. It also creates interpretive danger. Almost every year contains extraordinary weather somewhere. Almost every decade contains destructive earthquakes. A prophecy must therefore offer more than general disturbance if it is to identify one specific period convincingly. Otherwise, the sign can always be fulfilled. One fringe interpretation claims that ancient scholars understood earth and sky disturbances as part of a single repeating cosmic cycle that returns at fixed intervals. The idea sounds appealing because cycles feel mathematical and orderly. The surviving evidence does not establish such a global mechanism. What the texts do reveal is something more grounded. Ancient scholars believed patterns mattered. When patterns broke, attention increased. That principle survives even without supernatural explanation. Modern researchers do much the same thing through different methods. An unusual temperature record matters because it deviates from a measured baseline. A strange atmospheric pattern matters because it differs from expectation. The frameworks are different. The instinct to notice anomaly is shared. The storm above you begins to weaken. Rain softens into a steady whisper. Water drips from roof edges and runs through shallow channels in the courtyard. The air smells cleaner now, carrying wet earth and smoke. People emerge from shelter. Someone checks the wall. Someone examines the stored grain. Someone looks toward the sky. The world has returned to normal. But the observer keeps thinking, was the thunder ordinary? Was the direction significant? Did the timing match an old horror? Should the event be recorded? This is how a storm becomes more than weather. It enters memory. Memory enters text. Text enters interpretation. And when enough disturbances gather inside a single story, the boundary between natural event and warning begins to feel very thin. Your mind drifts toward repetition, because repetition is where the mystery becomes most persuasive. A darkened moon returns, rivers rise again, storms cross familiar landscapes, rulers fall, new rulers appear, and generations inherit the same uneasy impression that history has started repeating something it once tried to forget. Ancient Mesopotamian scholars understood repetition very well. They worked in societies where celestial cycles, seasonal changes, harvest rhythms, and political succession created recognizable patterns. Their records did not simply preserve isolated events. They helped specialists compare present conditions with remembered examples and decide whether an older pattern seemed to be returning. That habit gives omen literature much of its powers. A patina becomes stronger when it resembles something already recorded. If a certain celestial appearance once accompanied political trouble, a later occurrence might awaken concern. If unusual weather preceded food shortages, another strange season could be interpreted through the same inherited framework. Past and present begin to overlap. You can imagine a scholar unrolling his memory across several generations of records. One tablet describes an eclipse, another mentions a ruler facing rebellion, a third records failed crops during a difficult year. None of those texts need to describe the same event, yet the scholar may still perceive a meaningful pattern among them. Human memory prefers connection. It rarely stores history as a neutral warehouse. Certain events become memorable because they are dramatic. A peaceful year with ordinary weather leaves fewer emotional traces than a year containing an eclipse, a flood, a royal death, and a failed harvest. When several disruptions happen close together, later generations may remember them as part of one larger crisis. This creates a pattern even when causes differ. Records confirm that Mesopotamian scholars preserved extensive lists of signs precisely because comparison mattered. A new observation could be matched against established categories, allowing the specialist to place an unfamiliar event inside a familiar intellectual structure. That structure reduced uncertainty. It also encouraged recurrence. Once a category existed, later events could be fitted into it. The more flexible the category, the easier the fit became. A warning concerning political unrest could apply to many kingdoms. A statement about poor harvests could become relevant whenever agricultural conditions deteriorated. The pattern survives because history supplies new examples. You feel how easily this happens in your own mind. Several unusual headlines appear within a short period, and suddenly they seem connected. A rare eclipse receives attention, then severe flooding appears elsewhere. Political tension follows, another environmental disturbance enters the news. The sequence begins to feel deliberate. Yet chronological closeness does not always imply common cause. This distinction sounds obvious in calm circumstances. It becomes harder to maintain when events feel emotionally charged. A frightened mind prefers coherence. A coherent story is easier to remember than unrelated accidents. Researchers connected with Stanford University and Yale University have studied human pattern recognition from psychological and historical perspectives. While historians of ancient science examine how people organized observations into systems of meaning, the shared lesson is simple. Human beings are extraordinarily skilled at detecting patterns, even when the pattern may be incomplete. That skill is necessary for survival. It can also mislead. Imagine an ancient farmer noticing that a certain wind often arrives before rain. Recognizing that pattern is useful. If he notices birds moving before a storm, that may also help him prepare. But suppose he sees an eclipse shortly before a military defeat. The association is memory. Years later, another eclipse occurs. Now the defeat is remembered immediately. The celestial event becomes linked with political danger, even if countless eclipses have passed without similar consequences. This is where a recurring natural cycle can begin resembling fulfilled prophecy. The moon follows regular motion. Planets return to familiar regions of the sky. Rivers experience seasonal variations. Storm systems develop according to recurring atmospheric conditions. Human conflict also repeats because societies repeatedly face competition, inequality, succession disputes, resource shortages, and ambitions. When recurring natural events meet recurring human crises, coincidences become inevitable. The result can feel uncanny. One quirky feature of prophecy traditions is how often symbols remain broad enough to survive changing centuries. Darkness can mean fear, war, political uncertainty, religious anxiety, or literal celestial shadow. Water can represent flood, instability, cleansing, abundance, or destruction. Abundance, or a flexible symbol, rarely becomes obsolete. It adapts. That adaptability allows ancient warnings to appear modern without changing a single surviving word. A modern interpreter may see unusual weather and identify disturbed earth. Another may see conflict and identify broken order. Someone else may notice celestial events and identify heavenly warning. Each connection feels plausible separately. Together they create a powerful sequence. Scholars continue debating how consciously ancient omen compilers sought recurring historical patterns rather than merely preserving inherited symbolic rules. Some traditions appear strongly systematic. Others may reflect older associations whose original logic had already become obscure. That uncertainty matters because systems can outlive explanations. A later scholar may preserve an omen without knowing exactly why earlier generations associated that sign with that outcome. The tradition remains authoritative because it is old, organized, and professionally transmitted. Age can substitute for explanation. You hear the faint tapping of rain against a roof. The rhythm repeats. Your attention begins anticipating the next drop. This simple expectation captures something important about prophecy. Once a sequence appears recognizable, the mind begins waiting for the next element. First comes darkness, then unusual lights, then troubled waters, then disturbed earth and sky. If 4 stages appear to match current events, expectation becomes powerful. The 5th sign begins feeling inevitable. That psychological effect can operate even if the sequence itself was assembled recently. Once people believe they are inside a pattern, every new event becomes evidence to examine. Our ambiguity starts shrinking. Coincidence starts feeling intentional. A thunderstorm becomes more than weather. A political crisis becomes more than politics. A planetary conjunction becomes more than astronomy. Everything begins pointing in one direction. This is why repeated patterns are so persuasive. They create momentum. One event can be dismissed. 2 events create curiosity. 3 events invite comparison. 4 events begin to feel like structuring. By the time a 5th is expected, the mind may already be searching for fulfillment. The scholarly challenge is to reverse that process. Instead of asking whether current events fit the pattern, historians ask whether the pattern existed independently before those events were selected. They examine whether the sequence appears clearly in ancient evidence, whether the order is fixed, and whether the categories are specific enough to test. This approach feels less dramatic. It is also more reliable. A genuine predictive sequence should constrain interpretation rather than expand endlessly. If every flood counts, every eclipse counts, every storm counts, and every political disturbance counts, the prophecy becomes impossible to disprove. An unfalsifiable warning can survive forever. That may explain its emotional endurance. The pattern always seems nearly complete. History keeps supplying material. A new war appears. A new drought begins. A new ruler faces unrest. Another eclipse crosses the sky. The old framework receives fresh life. You look upward through clearing clouds. Several stars have emerged again. Their positions are familiar because the night sky itself repeats rhythms older than every kingdom that ever watched it. Those rhythms are real. Human interpretation moves across them like another layer. Perhaps the unsettling question is not whether ancient prophecy keeps coming true. Perhaps it is whether the world keeps producing the same kinds of conditions that make prophecy feel true. Civilization rises. Systems strain. Nature disrupts plans. People search for order. Then the cycle begins again, not exactly, but closely enough to awaken recognition. That recognition is powerful. And once history begins to resemble memory, even coincidence can feel like a warning. The number 2026 looks strangely solid when printed on a screen. 4 digits destined and in perfect order, precise enough to suggest calculation, prediction, and certainty. Yet if you carry that number backward into ancient Mesopotamia, its confidence begins to dissolve. No Sumerian scribe sits beneath a temple lamp and writes that distant year exactly as you recognize it today. Their calendars worked differently. Time was measured through local systems tied to rulers, months, festivals, agricultural cycles, and memorable events. A year could be identified by something a king had done, such as dedicating a temple, defeating an enemy, or completing an important canal. The year gained identity from history rather than from one continuous global numbering system. This creates an immediate problem for modern prophecy claims. If an ancient tablet supposedly points toward 2026, someone must build a bridge between ancient chronology and the modern calendar. That bridge can be constructed, but every step requires assumptions, and the ancient text must first be dated. Its numerical information must then be interpreted, and finally those numbers must be converted into the calendar used today. Each conversion introduces uncertainty. You imagine a modern researcher seated beneath white archive lights with photographs of tablets spread across a desk. One document gives the name of a king, another refers to a known event, a third contains astronomical information that may help narrow the date. Chronology becomes a puzzle. Records confirm that historians have reconstructed large parts of Mesopotamian chronology through king lists, inscriptions, astronomical observations, archaeological layers, and connections with neighbouring civilizations. Scholars from institutions including Yale University, Oxford University, and the University of Chicago have spent generations refining these timelines. The result is impressive. It is not perfectly simple. Some periods are securely dated, others contain disagreements. Ancient records can conflict. Kings may have ruled simultaneously in different regions, and later copies sometimes preserve traditions whose chronological accuracy remains debatable. A date therefore has a history of its own. The number 2026 belongs to the Gregorian calendar used internationally today. Ancient Mesopotamian scribes had no reason to count toward it because the system did not yet exist. This fact alone does not stop modern interpreters. Instead, they search for numerical patterns. A tablet may contain a period of years, a sequence of celestial cycles, or a count associated with rains. The modern reader then selects a starting point and carries the calculation forward. Okay, to clean, the historical basis may not be. Suppose an ancient text mentions a cycle lasting a certain number of years. You must first decide whether the number is literal. You must determine where the cycle begins. You must know whether the ancient year length matches the modern value being used. Then comes the larger question. Why should that cycle point specifically towards 2026? Without an ancient statement defining the starting point and intended future meaning, several answers may be possible. Change the starting date slightly, and the final date moves. A prophecy can drift by years. Sometimes it can drift by centuries. This is where precision creates an illusion. A calculation ending on 2026 appears stronger than a vague prediction, even if the inputs were selected selectively. Modern audiences often trust exact numbers because exactness resembles scientific measurement. But exact arithmetic cannot repair uncertain assumptions. If the starting point is speculative, the result remains speculative. One quirky feature of ancient chronology makes matters even more complicated. Mesopotamian communities often used lunar months, and authorities occasionally inserted additional months to keep the calendar aligned with the seasons. The calendar had to be adjusted. Months followed the moon, while agriculture followed the solar year. Without occasional correction, festivals and planting seasons would slowly drift away from their expected positions. This practical system worked well for ancient society. It complicates simplistic conversion. A modern interpreter treating every ancient year as an identical block of modern days may create errors before the calculation even begins. That difficulty becomes larger across thousands of years. You picture a chain of numbers stretching from an ancient reign toward the present. Every link seems small, but tiny uncertainties accumulate. Which ruler began? Which version of the text is being used? Does the number represent years, months, reigns, or symbolic units? Was an additional month inserted during the relevant period? Was the original line damaged? Were later copies faithful? A dramatic date can hide all these questions. Scholars continue debating particular points in early Mesopotamian chronology, especially where documentary evidence becomes sparse. Different chronological models have sometimes shifted the dates assigned to rulers and events by decades. That matters enormously for prophecy calculations. If the ancient anchor moves, the supposed modern fulfillment moves with it. A prediction that works only under one disputed chronology is not the same as a date explicitly stated by an ancient scribe. The difference is fundamental. You begin to notice another method used in fringe interpretations. Instead of starting with a clearly defined ancient date, the interpreter begins with 2026 itself. Then the search moves backward. A planetary cycle is found. A reign length is selected. A symbolic number is added. Eventually an ancient reference appears to line up. The result feels like discovery. But the direction of reasoning matters. When the target date is chosen first, enough numerical flexibility can often produce a path toward it. This resembles drawing the destination before creating the map. The process can still involve real mathematics. It can still use authentic ancient numbers, yet the conclusion may reflect selection rather than prediction. This is why historians ask whether the method was established before the modern date became interesting. If not, the calculation deserves caution. You can test this idea mentally. Choose almost any year. Then search ancient records for numbers that can be added, multiplied, or connected through cycles. With enough options, surprising matches will appear. Coincidence becomes unavoidable. Numbers are abundant. History is long. A date can acquire significance simply because someone looks hard enough. That does not mean all ancient numerical systems were arbitrary. Mesopotamian mathematics was disciplined, sophisticated, and practical. Astronomers tracked cycles with remarkable care. The mistake occurs when mathematical competence is transformed into evidence of a distant coded prophecy. Those are different claims. One is historically well supported. The other requires independent proof. Your attention returns to the number 2026. It no longer looks like a message carved directly into clay. It looks like the endpoint of an interpretation. That is a much more interesting position because it allows you to see how modern prophecy develops. First comes an authentic ancient tradition, then comes a numerical relationship, next comes a modern calendar conversion. Finally comes certainty. The final step is often the least justified. A scholarly reconstruction usually preserves ranges, doubts, and competing possibilities. Prophetic retellings tend to remove them because uncertainty weakens drama. The number becomes fixed. The warning becomes imminent. The audience begins watching the year. This psychological shift is all powerful. Once a date has been announced, ordinary events occurring within that period start gathering symbolic weight. A storm is no longer simply a storm. Political unrest is no longer simply unrest. Everything becomes evidence. The calendar itself becomes part of the narrative. You can almost hear the months turning like pages. January passes. Spring arrives. Summer brings new events. People search headlines for confirmation. The year begins feeling different because expectation has changed. Yet the ancient scribe remains silent about your calendar. He knew months by lunar observation. He knew years through kings and Funmor and events. He knew celestial cycles through careful records. He knew nothing called 2026. That absence does not make his world less sophisticated. It simply places the modern date where it belongs. Not inside the tablet, inside the interpretation. And perhaps the strangest thing about 2026 is not that ancient scribes predicted it, but that modern people can make an ancient system appear to point toward almost any year, once enough assumptions are quietly placed between the clay and the calendar. The year 2027 appears at first like a second destination, another number waiting just beyond the edge of the present. Yet the path leading toward it is even more delicate than the calculation attached to 2026. Once modern interpreters decide that one ancient sequence reaches a particular year, extending the pattern by another cycle can seem natural. That apparent simplicity hides a series of choices. You imagine a table covered with notes. One column lists ancient numbers, another lists astronomical intervals, a third contains modern dates. The interpreter begins connecting them, searching for a progression that moves smoothly from one year into the next. If an eclipse or planetary event falls near 2026, another phenomenon in 2027 may be treated as continuation rather than coincidence. This is where chronology becomes storytelling. The numbers are real. The arrangement may still be selective. Ancient Mesopotamian texts sometimes preserve repeated intervals, rain lengths, celestial periods, and ritual cycles. These numbers had practical meaning inside their own systems. A modern reader, however, can combine them in ways the ancient author never indicated. A cycle becomes a countdown. A sequence becomes a schedule. A repeated number becomes a hidden marker. The calculation begins to feel prophetic because every stage produces something measurable. Yet the essential historical question remains unchanged. Did the ancient text itself tell the reader to continue the sequence this way? If not, the modern calculation may be mathematically possible without being historically intended. That difference deserves patience. Records from Mesopotamian astronomy show that scholars became highly skilled at tracking recurrence. They recognized that celestial phenomena return according to patterns, although not every cycle is perfectly simple. The moon repeats phases. Planets return to similar positions. Eclipses follow recurring relationships. Seasonal observations return with variation. A trained scholar could use those repetitions to anticipate certain events. But repeating astronomy does not automatically produce repeating history. That is the crucial leap. Suppose a planetary configuration returns after a known interval. The astronomical recurrence is real. Yet there is no necessary reason that the same political crisis, flood, or social disturbance must accompany it. The sky can repeat without society repeating. Modern prophecy claims often blur these categories. A celestial cycle provides the clock. Historical events provide the meaning. The two are then treated as one system. You hear the faint turning of paper beneath your fingers as another calculation appears. Perhaps someone starts with an eclipse, adds a planetary interval, then reaches a later date. Another interpreter may begin with the reign of an ancient king and count forward through symbolic periods. Both can arrive near 2027. That convergence looks impressive. It may reflect shared assumptions. When several calculations use similar starting points, similar numbers, and similar expectations, they are not truly independent confirmations. They may simply repeat the same interpretive choice in different forms. This is an important scholarly distinction. Independent evidence strengthens a claim. Repeated use of the same assumption does not. Researchers connected with major institutions such as Oxford University and Yale University often approach ancient chronology by testing different lines of evidence against one another. Archaeological layers, inscriptions, astronomical references, and historical synchronisms become stronger when they converge independently. Prophetic calculation requires the same discipline. Otherwise, one uncertain anchor can port an entire tower. You picture that tower mentally. At the bottom sits an ancient number. Above it sits a disputed interpretation. Then comes a calendar conversion. Then an astronomical event. Then a modern historical parallel. At the top sits 2027. From a distance, the structure looks solid. Up close, each level depends on the one beneath it. One small shift can move the entire conclusion. A single year matters when a prophecy claims precision. This is especially important because ancient calendars did not align neatly with modern ones. Month lengths varied according to lunar observation, and additional months could be inserted when necessary. Modern conversion requires careful reconstruction. Even when scholars can identify an ancient date confidently, turning it into a modern equivalent may involve technical considerations unfamiliar to popular audiences. Prophecy videos usually skip those details. Details slow the story, certainty speeds it up, and you can understand the temptation. A sentence such as the calculation may point somewhere between several possible years feels weak beside a bold claim that everything reaches 2027. The second version is easier to remember. It is also easier to fear. This emotional difference matters because prophecy thrives on immediacy. A warning centuries away feels abstract. A warning attached to next year feels personal. people begin wondering what they should expect. Political change, economic instability, unusual weather, another celestial event. Once those possibilities are introduced, almost any major development can become confirmation. The range of acceptable evidence expands. That makes the prediction difficult to test fairly. A quirky feature of modern numerical prophecy is the tendency to treat neighbouring years as stages within one unfolding event. If something happens late in 2026 and another event appears early in 2027, the two can be joined into a single prophetic window. The boundary between years becomes flexible. That flexibility helps the story survive. If nothing decisive occurs during one calendar year, the interpretation can extend into the next. A symbolic period may be redefined. A celestial cycle may be said to complete later than expected. The prophecy moves without appearing to move. Scholars debate how ancient Mesopotamian people themselves understood long-term prediction. Some texts clearly concerned immediate consequences. Others preserved recurring rules that could be consulted whenever similar signs appeared. What remains difficult to support is the idea of one continuous countdown stretching thousands of years toward two modern dates. The surviving tradition does not require such a mechanism. Modern reconstruction creates it. You look again at the calculations. The numbers are neat. That neatness itself becomes suspicious. Real historical chronology is rarely perfectly neat. Dynasties overlap, records break, calendars change, copies contain errors. Political systems collapse and reappear. A perfectly smooth path across thousands of years should therefore invite more scrutiny, not less. History is full of irregular edges. Prophecy prefers straight lines. The contrast is revealing. A modern interpreter may smooth the uncertainty, because the audience expects resolution. Ancient ambiguity becomes modern precision. The damaged line is restored. The uncertain number is fixed. The disputed date is selected. The symbolic meaning is expanded. Then the result is presented as if every step were equally secure. You begin noticing how easily this can happen without deliberate deception. Each decision seems small. One probable reading is chosen. One likely date is selected. One attractive astronomical event is matched. One modern crisis is compared. At the end, the chain feels inevitable. But probability does not become certainty simply because several uncertain steps are connected. Uncertain. They can accumulate. A small doubt at every stage creates a much larger doubt at the end. This principle is less exciting than prophecy. It is also essential. The night outside your imagined study grows quieter. A clock marks another hour, while the number 2027 remains written at the top of the page. It looks almost expectant. Yet nothing inside the number explains why ancient scribes should have considered it special. Its importance comes from the modern framework built around it. That framework may use authentic ancient astronomy. It may use real cycles. It may use genuine historical data. But a structure made from authentic pieces can still form a picture the original makers never intended. This is perhaps the strangest part of the calculation. The ancient material does not need to be false for the conclusion to be speculative. Everything can begin with real tablets, real mathematics, real celestial cycles, real historical uncertainty. Then interpretation quietly supplies the final bridge. By the time the calculation reaches 2027, the bridge looks like a road. The distinction almost disappears. You stare at the 2 years side by side, 2026, 2027. They now seem less like dates carved into destiny and more like coordinates chosen by modern readers searching for order across deep time. Perhaps that is why the claim remains so compelling. The years are close enough to feel urgent. The ancient source is distant enough to feel mysterious. And between them lies just enough uncertainty for imagination to complete the journey. The final warning does not begin with fire in the sky or water over the walls. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, inside the structures people trust. A judge hesitates, a merchant doubts the weight on a scale, a soldier questions an order, a family hears rumours about the palace and wonders whether tomorrow will resemble today. This kind of disorder is harder to see. It does not arrive as one event. It spreads through confidence. Ancient Mesopotamian society depended on layers of authority that connected household, temple, palace, law, taxation, irrigation, trade, and military powers. When these systems worked together, daily life could feel stable even during difficult seasons. When they weakened, ordinary problems became more dangerous because fewer institutions could absorb the shock. A bad harvest is one thing. A bad harvest during political fragmentation is another. A disputed succession can unsettle taxation. A weakened administration can neglect canals. Neglected canals can reduce agricultural output. Reduced output can raise prices. Higher prices can deepen resentment. The pattern is not mystical. It is structural. You move through an imagined city where the markets remain open, but conversation has changed. People speak more softly around officials. Traders complain that routes are less secure. Farmers worry about obligations they cannot meet. Temple administrators calculate shortages. Soldiers wait for delayed payments. Nothing has collapsed completely. That is what makes the atmosphere uneasy. Order often weakens before it visibly breaks. Records from Mesopotamia show that political instability could affect almost every level of society. Dynastic struggles, invasions, shifting alliances, regional rebellions, and administrative decline sometimes disrupted systems that had taken generations to build. This historical fact gives the final alleged sign its power. A warning about broken order can fit many eras because every complex society contains points of strain. The ancient world knew this intimately. A city might remain physically intact while authority fragmented around it. The walls still stand. The temples still function. The markets still open. Yet confidence begins leaking away. You can feel that kind of instability through subtle details. A local official delays a decision because he does not know which ruler will prevail. A caravan takes a longer route to avoid fighting. A household hides grain instead of selling it. A labourer demands payment in something more reliable. Trust changes behaviour. Behaviour changes the system. Soon instability becomes self-reinforcing. One quirky feature of ancient political life is how rapidly rulers could present themselves as restorers of order. Inscriptions often emphasize justice, temple restoration, defeated enemies, rebuilt walls, and renewed prosperity because these themes answered deep public fears. A king rarely wanted to describe himself as merely surviving. He wanted to appear as the man who made the world reliable again. That language reveals what people valued. Order meant predictable taxes, working canals, safe roads, accepted weights, stable food supply, recognized authority, religious continuity, protection from enemies. When several of these weakened together, disorder could feel cosmic even when the causes were entirely human. This is where ancient political thought and omen interpretation intersect. If rulers were expected to maintain earthly order under divine favour, Then widespread instability could be interpreted as evidence that something larger had gone wrong. Politics became theology. Theology became diagnosis. A failed system could be read as a disturbed universe. You imagine a council chamber lit by lamps. Officials argue quietly. One believes more troops are needed. Another warns that grain stores are low. A third fears that heavier taxation will provoke unrest. No one possesses a perfect solution. The danger comes from combination. This is an important development because the final sign is not one spectacular occurrence. It is convergence. Political weakness, economic pressure, environmental stress, public mistrust, administrative strain. Each problem alone may be manageable. Together they can really Westminster Shore. Researchers at universities including Yale University and Stanford University have examined ancient state formation, institutional resilience, and the ways complex societies respond to multiple pressures. Their work reinforces a simple historical lesson. Collapse rarely comes from one cause. Comes from systems fail through interaction. That does not mean every crisis leads to collapse. Many societies recover. Institutions adapt. Leaders reform policies. Trade routes shift. Communities reorganize. This is where prophecy language becomes dangerous if it assumes inevitability. The existence of strain does not prove the arrival of destruction. A system can bend without breaking. Ancient Mesopotamian history demonstrates this repeatedly. Cities survived invasions, dynasties changed, temples were rebuilt, populations moved and returned, political centres shifted while cultural traditions continued. Civilization is surprisingly resilient. That resilience complicates any final warning. If the sign is defined merely as disorder, then almost every troubled period qualifies. If the sign means complete collapse, then the evidence must be far more specific. The difference is enormous. Scholars still debate how best to define collapse in ancient societies. Does political fragmentation count? Does population movement count? Does the disappearance of one dynasty qualify if cities continue functioning under another? There is no single answer. Collapse can describe different scales. A palace may fall while villages continue. A city may shrink while regional trade survives. One political order may disappear while language, religion, and family life persist. History review uses clean endings. Modern prophecy often prefers them. That preference creates tension around the alleged fifth sign. A phrase describing broken order can be expanded until it sounds like the end of civilization. Yet ancient societies often experienced broken order as transition rather than extinction. The old structure weakens. Something else takes its place. You hear footsteps in the market. The city has not stopped. Bread is still baked. Children still vary water. A craftsman still repairs a door. A woman still bargains over grain. These ordinary actions matter because they reveal how people live through instability. History continues at street level. Even when rulers change, families still need food. Even when armies move, traders course or still seek customers. Even when temples lose wealth, communities preserve rituals. The official system may fracture while social life improvises. That adaptation is easy to overlook in dramatic narratives. A prophecy wants a single moment. Reality offers uneven change. One neighborhood suffers, another adapts. One region empties, another grows. One ruler falls, another claims restoration. The process may last decades, You begin to see why the final sign can feel as if it's always happening somewhere. Every generation experiences distrust. Every political system faces pressure. Every economy produces winners and losers. Every society contains arguments about whether order is weakening. This makes the line emotionally powerful but historically difficult to test. The broader the language, the easier the match. A fringe interpretation sometimes claims that ancient scholars described a final stage in which every layer of society would fail at once, proving the end of a great cycle. The surviving evidence does not establish one universal countdown of that kind. What it does preserve is a deep awareness of fragility. Ancient people knew that civilization depends on coordination. Water must arrive. Grain must move. Officials must be obeyed. Merchants must trust contracts. Soldiers must receive support. Temples must maintain legitimacy. Families must believe tomorrow is worth preparing for. If enough of those connections fail, disorder becomes more than a political problem. It becomes a crisis of expectation. That may be the most unsettling version of the final sign. Not fire, not darkness, not one terrible day. The sign appears when people stop believing the system will behave as expected. You stand in the city at dusk. The gates are still open. The river still moves. The lamps still burn. Nothing announces the end. Yet the conversations are different. The people are watching one another more carefully. Officials speak with less confidence. Rumours travel faster than orders. The city remains standing, but certainty has begun to leave it. Perhaps broken order has always looked like this. Not like sudden ruin, but like 1,000 small decisions made under growing doubt. And when doubt spreads far enough, the structure may still exist long after people have stopped trusting it. The unsettling question is not whether the world feels unstable. It often does. The harder question is whether present conditions truly match an ancient warning, or whether the resemblance becomes convincing only after broad symbols are placed beside modern events. You stand between those possibilities, listening to the noise of the present while ancient clay remains silent about your conclusions. Modern life produces constant streams of information, political tension, economic pressure, environmental disruption, migration, war, technological change, and public distrust can all appear within the same week, because the information arrives so quickly. Events that once felt geographically distant now seem to happen inside one shared space. That changes perception. A flood in one country appears beside a political crisis in another. A market shock appears beside an earthquake. A heatwave appears beside military conflict. The human mind begins combining them. This is where the final sign becomes persuasive. Broken order does not require one exact event. It can absorb many forms of instability, allowing scattered developments to appear like pieces of one larger pattern. The fit feels strong. The evidence remains uncertain. Historians approach such claims differently. Instead of beginning with the assumption that a prophecy is unfolding, they ask whether the supposed ancient description was specific enough to identify the present uniquely. That word matters. Uniquely. If the same warning could describe the late Bronze Age, the fall of Assyria, the crisis of the Roman Empire, medieval famines, early modern wars, or the 20th century, then resemblance alone cannot establish fulfillment. History offers many troubled eras. Some were far worse than the present. Others merely felt catastrophic to the people living through them. You imagine someone in an ancient city hearing that enemy forces are approaching while food prices rise and officials quarrel over succession. To that person, the world may appear to be ending. The city survives. Another generation rebuilds. Later, people forget how final the crisis once felt. This creates a powerful historical illusion. Every generation experiences its own uncertainty from the inside. The future is hidden. The danger feels immediate. The outcome remains unknown. Later historians know which crises passed. People living through them do not. Researchers at institutions such as Stanford University and Yale University have examined how societies respond to institutional stress, political polarization, and collective fear. Their work reminds us that perception itself can shape behavior, even when objective conditions remain mixed. Fear changes decisions. Rumor changes markets. Mistrust changes cooperation. Expectation can become forces. That does not make anxiety imaginary. It means interpretation can influence the very systems being interpreted. The ancient idea of broken order becomes unexpectedly relevant here. Society does not require physical destruction to feel unstable. It only requires enough people to lose confidence in the rules, institutions, or expectations that normally guide behavior. Yet confidence is difficult to measure. One person sees decline, another sees transition, a third sees reform. The same event can support opposite conclusions. This is why scholars use indicators rather than impressions alone. They examine mortality, migration, food production, trade, state capacity, conflict intensity, institutional continuity, and population movement. The picture often becomes complicated. Some systems weaken while others strengthen. One region suffers while another remains stable. One institution loses trust while another gains influence. A universal collapse becomes difficult to demonstrate. A quirky modern habit makes the problem even stranger. People often search old prophecies only after unusual events occur, then notice phrases that appear to match them. The timing reverses the weights. Instead of prediction followed by event, the event arrives first. The prophecy is selected later. This process can create extraordinary seeming accuracy because the interpreter already knows what needs to be matched. It's like shooting an arrow into a wall and drawing the target around it. The result looks perfect. The method is not predictive. This principle becomes especially important in 2026 because many people encounter ancient prophecy claims through short videos, reposted images, and compressed summaries rather than complete translations. A dramatic sentence travels quickly. Uncertainty travels slowly. The claim becomes sharper as context disappears. Soon the ancient text appears to have predicted exactly what people are already discussing. You feel how easily urgency enters the story. A commentator points toward political division and calls it broken authority. Another points toward economic unease and calls it failing order. Another points toward environmental extremes and calls them signs of cosmic disturbance. None of these observations are invented. The question is whether they belong together as fulfillment. That connection requires evidence. Scholars continue debating how ancient societies themselves understood systemic crisis. Some researchers emphasize environmental pressures, others focus on warfare, trade disruption, elite competition, inequality, or institutional weakness. No single explanation accounts for every collapse. That should make modern prophetic certainty uncomfortable. Real societies are complicated. Their crises rarely move in 5 tidy stages. Events overlap. Causes interact. Recovery begins before collapse is complete. Conditions differ. Human choices alter outcomes. A prophecy built from broad stages can smooth this complexity into a clean narrative. The clean narrative is easier to remember. Reality is not You walk mentally through a modern city at night. Traffic moves. Hospitals remain open. Markets continue trading. People argue online. Flights cross continents. Power grids hum. Governments issue statements. Families prepare meals. At the same time, somewhere else, war destroys neighbourhoods, drought pressures farms, or political unrest fills public squares. Order and disorder coexist. This coexistence matters. The final sign may appear convincing if attention focuses only on the breakdowns. It becomes less certain when continuity is included. Civilization is never entirely stable. It is also rarely entirely broken. Most historical periods occupy the uncomfortable space between those extremes. That space invites prophecy. One fringe interpretation claims that the final sign is not collapse itself, but synchronized instability across many regions. This idea feels modern because global communication makes simultaneous crises visible. Yet simultaneity is difficult to evaluate. With billions of people living across many political systems, several serious crises are almost always occurring somewhere. The world is large enough to produce constant disturbance. Visibility amplifies the feeling of convergence. Ancient people knew fewer distant events. Modern people know almost all of them instantly. The difference can make the present feel uniquely chaotic even when historical comparison remains more complicated. This does not mean contemporary risk should be dismissed. It means fear should not become evidence automatically. The scholar's task is slower. Define the sign. Identify the original wording. Establish the date before the event. Specify what would count as fulfillment. Specify what would count as failure. Without those conditions, the warning becomes impossible to test. That is where the ancient mystery changes character. Perhaps the final sign is not happening now. Perhaps parts of it always seem to be happening. Perhaps the phrase describes a recurring human condition rather than one appointed year. The uncertainty is more unsettling than certainty because it offers no clear finish. You cannot simply wait for one date to pass. Broken order remains a possibility wherever institutions lose trust, resources tighten, or leadership fails. That was true in ancient Mesopotamia. It remains true today. The similarity is real. The prophecy is less certain. You stand at the edge of that distinction while the modern city glows beneath you. Nothing in the lights confirms an ancient countdown. Nothing in the clay denies that societies can become fragile. The evidence refuses the dramatic answer. It leaves you with something quieter. The final sign may resemble the present because the fears behind it never disappeared. And perhaps that resemblance says more about recurring human vulnerability than about a date written into fate. The tablet lies beneath glass, smaller than the legend built around it. Its surface is uneven, the edges chipped, the signs compressed into rows made by hands that vanished thousands of years ago. You lean closer, expecting perhaps a coded warning about distant generations. What emerges instead is something quieter, more complicated, and in many ways more revealing about the ancient mind. The surviving cuneiform evidence does not present a simple sentence announcing 5 signs for the years 2026 and 2027. What it preserves is a vast intellectual world in which unusual events were classified, compared, interpreted, and recorded. The tablets speak repeatedly about uncertainty, but they do so through systems rather than through one straightforward countdown. That difference changes the mystery. Ancient Mesopotamian scholars were not waiting for one final date. They were managing risk. Their texts helped them answer a practical question that rulers and communities asked repeatedly. If something unusual happens, what might it mean, and what should be done about it? The omen collections functioned like enormous libraries of possibilities. A particular celestial condition could be linked with one outcome. A different direction might alter the meaning. A different month might shift the interpretation again. The same basic phenomenon could generate several possible consequences depending on contexts. The system was flexible because reality was unpredictable. You can feel that flexibility in the structure. The text does not always say this event will certainly happen. Instead, it often presents conditional relationships. If a sign appears under certain circumstances, then a particular consequence may follow. That is not the language of inevitability. It is the language of interpretation. Records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm that scholars gathered such conditional statements into large organized series. These collections could contain hundreds of possibilities, many arranged according to carefully structured variations. This reveals an important truth. The tablets were not merely predicting. They were categorizing uncertainty. That is a different intellectual activity. Imagine a royal advisor confronted with an eclipse. He does not begin from nothing. He consults a tradition containing multiple precedents and possible meanings. The text gives him a framework for deciding which danger seems most relevant. The framework creates order from ambiguity. Modern science does something very different in method, but a faint resemblance remains. A physician compares symptoms with known patterns. A meteorologist compares present conditions with past weather. An economist studies indicators for possible outcomes. None of these people knows the future perfectly. They work with structured uncertainty. Mesopotamian diviners did something culturally different, yet psychologically familiar. They wanted uncertainty to become legible. Scholars associated with universities such as Oxford University and Yale University have shown that Mesopotamian intellectual traditions often combined observation, classification, ritual practice, and inherited symbolic meaning. The categories modern people separate into religion, science, and administration frequently overlapped. That overlap can be difficult to imagine today. A scholar could record a planetary position carefully and still interpret it through divine symbolism. A ruler could respond to an omen with ritual while also strengthening defences. A community could pray for protection while repairing canals. The ancient system allowed practical action and sacred interpretation to coexist. That complexity disappears when a tablet is reduced to a single dramatic prophecy. You notice how much is lost. The damage sign becomes certainty. The conditional statement becomes prediction. The local danger becomes global disaster. The open possibility becomes a dated event. The ancient worldview becomes a modern headline. The transformation is efficient. It is also misleading. One quirky feature of cuneiform scholarship is that some texts preserve comments, explanations, or alternative readings beside inherited material. These additions show that ancient scholars themselves sometimes wrestled with ambiguities. They did not always agree. A difficult phrase could invite interpretation even in antiquity. That detail matters because modern audiences sometimes imagine ancient tablets as perfectly clear messages that only modern scholars complicate. The opposite can be true. The uncertainty may already be ancient. A scribe encounters an obscure line. He compares versions. He chooses one reading. Another scholar may choose differently. The tradition grows around disagreement. This makes the surviving tablets feel more human. They are not machines dispensing fixed answers. They are evidence of people thinking. Scholars continue debating how much omen literature reflects direct observation, inherited symbolism, scribal theory, and political necessity. Different texts may belong to different combinations of these influences. No single explanation fits all of them. That is why the phrase "what the tablet really says" is more difficult than it appears. There may not be one tablet. There may not be one version. There may not be one date. There may not even be one original meaning preserved intact. Instead, there are traditions, fragments, copies, variants, commentaries, interpretation. The historical task is to reconstruct these carefully without forcing them into a modern shape. You imagine the museum lights dimming. The tablet remains visible in its case. It does not glow. It does not reveal a hidden calendar. Its power comes from something subtler. It has survived long enough to show you how another civilization confronted the fear of not knowing what would happen next. That fear is recognizable. A ruler worries about enemies. A farmer worries about rainfall. A merchant worries about routes. A family worries about food. A scholar worries about what a strange event might mean. Everyone lives inside uncertainty. The omen system offers structure. This may be the deeper hidden story. The tablets do not reveal a secret schedule for distant humanity. They reveal a civilization building an intellectual machine for dealing with uncertainty. Every category becomes a way to reduce fear. Every omen becomes a possibility placed inside order. Every ritual becomes an attempt to respond rather than remain helpless. Seen this way, the tablets become more impressive, not less. They are evidence of organized thought stretching across centuries. They preserve attempts to connect observation with meaning. They show how human beings create systems when reality refuses to explain itself. Modern prophecy often reverses that process. Instead of using uncertainty as the starting point, it presents certainty as the destination. The date becomes fixed. The signs become numbered. The sequence becomes inevitable. Then every event is interpreted through that structure. Ancient divination could certainly be confident, but its surviving complexity shows a world with many possible outcomes. That difference deserves attention. One strange event might threaten one region but not another. One omen might be weakened by another. One ritual might alter the expected outcome. One interpretation might compete with another. The future remained open enough to require specialists. A completely fixed future would make most of their work unnecessary. You begin to understand the paradox. The more seriously Mesopotamian people took omens, the more they needed possibility. A warning matters only if action can still matter. Otherwise, it is not guidance. It is merely a sentence. The tablet therefore speaks most clearly when it refuses to become what modern prophecy wants it to be. It is not a clean countdown. It is a map of anxiety. It records the ways a civilization tried to read danger before danger became catastrophe. That may be why the tablets still feel so contemporary. People today also build systems for anticipating risk, forecasts, models, intelligence reports, economic indicators, and scientific monitoring all attempt to reduce uncertainty. The methods are different. The desire is familiar. You want to know early. You want enough warning to act. You want the future to leave traces before it arrives. Ancient Mesopotamian scholars wanted the same thing. Their answer was written in wedges pressed into clay. The modern answer appears in data, screens, charts, and models. Both begin with the same uncomfortable fact. Human beings cannot see very far ahead. The tablet beneath the glass does not solve that problem. It simply shows how old the problem is. And perhaps the hidden truth is not that one forgotten scribe predicted the 21st century. Perhaps it is that every civilization invents its own language for uncertainty, then hopes that language will become prophecy before the danger becomes real. The room is quiet enough that you can hear the faint hum of modern climate control around the ancient display case. Outside, people move through streets filled with lights, engines, phones, and urgent conversations. Inside, the clay remains still. Yet the impulse surrounding it is alive. Because human beings continue asking the same question whenever the world feels uncertain. Is this chaos random, or does it belong to a pattern? Prophecies return because uncertainty is uncomfortable. A prediction offers structure. It turns scattered events into sequence. It suggests that disorder has a shape. That emotional promise can be deeply reassuring even when the prophecy itself is frightening. A frightening future may feel easier to endure if it appears understandable. History offers many examples of this pattern. Periods of war often produce renewed interest in old predictions. Disease outbreaks revive forgotten warnings. Eclipses attract interpretations. Political instability encourages people to search for texts that seem to describe collapse. The content changes. The instinct remains. You can understand why. When ordinary explanations feel insufficient, people reach toward older authority. An ancient text seems detached from present politics. Its age gives it weight. Its distance makes it feel impartial. A warning written thousands of years ago cannot be accused of reacting emotionally to today's headlines. At least that is how it feels. The difficulty is that modern readers choose which ancient passages to notice. A text about prosperity may be ignored. A text about disaster spreads quickly. A damaged sentence mentioning kings and darkness attracts attention because it fits existing fears. Selection becomes invisible. Soon the surviving fragments seem unusually prophetic. Researchers from institutions such as Yale University and Stanford University have studied how collective memory and expectation bands and uncertainty shape human behavior. Their work supports a broader historical observation. People do not encounter the past neutrally. They approach it carrying present concerns. That changes what becomes visible. A generation worried about war notices military omens. A generation worried about climate notices floods and droughts. A generation worried about political division notices warnings about broken authority. The ancient text becomes a mirror. The reflection feels like prediction. This is one reason prophecy traditions can remain durable across centuries. Their symbols are broad enough to absorb changing fears, yet specific enough to feel meaningful. Darkness works in almost any era. So does famine. So does rebellion. So does plague. So does the fall of rulers. The vocabulary survives because human societies keep producing the conditions it describes. That does not make prophecy meaningless. It makes prophecy culturally powerful. You walk through an imagined archive filled with centuries of warnings. Some predict invasion, some warn of failed harvests, some associate celestial events with royal danger, others describe disorder in cities. Most never become famous. A few do. The famous ones are often those that appear to match later events. This is another hidden mechanism. Successful-looking prophecies are remembered. Failed prophecies disappear. A prediction that does not fit history may remain unread in a collection. A prediction that seems to match a famous disaster is repeated, quoted, and reinterpreted. Memory filters the evidence. Over time, the surviving examples appear more accurate than the original body of predictions actually was. This effect is not limited to ancient history. Modern forecasts can be remembered selectively too. People recall the dramatic prediction that appeared correct. They forget the 10 similar predictions that failed. The result creates an illusion of extraordinary foresight. One quirky habit appears repeatedly in prophecy culture. Dates are often adjusted after events fail to unfold as expected. A symbolic year becomes a window. A window becomes a cycle becomes a preparation period. The prediction survives by changing its boundaries. This flexibility protects belief. It also makes testing difficult. A precise prediction should have a meaningful chance of being wrong. Otherwise, it becomes interpretation rather than forecast. Scholars continue debating why apocalyptic and prophetic beliefs intensify during periods of social stress. Some emphasize fear and uncertainty. Others highlight political identity, religious expectation, community formation, or the psychological desire for moral order. Several explanations may be true at once. Prophecy does more than predict. It explains. It tells people why suffering exists. It identifies who is responsible. It promises that disorder belongs to a larger structure. Sometimes it even offers hope. If history follows a pattern, then chaos may not be endless. A broken age could become the beginning of renewal. This helps explain why frightening prophecies are not always purely pessimistic. They often contain hidden reassurance. The crisis has meaning. The suffering has a place. The pattern will eventually move. That emotional structure appears repeatedly across cultures. You feel its appeal while standing beside ancient clay. If the 5 signs are real, then uncertainty becomes sequence. You know where you are. You know what comes next. You know the chaos is not random. But if the sequence is modern reconstruction, you lose that comfort. You return to uncertainty. That may be harder to accept. A world without prophecy requires patience. Events may have multiple causes. Some crises may be connected. Others may not. History may turn because of decisions nobody planned. No hidden schedule guarantees the outcome. This open future can feel more frightening than a prediction. It's also more realistic. Human beings have always lived inside that openness. Ancient kings consulted omens because they did not know what would happen. Modern governments consult models because they do not know what will happen. Families save money because they do not know what will happen. Farmers watch weather because they do not know what will happen. The future keeps its distance. Prophecy tries to close it. Perhaps this is why ancient tablets attract so much modern attention. They seem like objects that have already crossed time successfully. They survived kingdoms, languages, wars, floods, fires, and migrations. If anything could carry a message forward, clay feels capable. A tablet looks permanent. Permanent? Its meaning is less permanent. Every generation translates it again. Every generation emphasizes different fears. Every generation asks whether the message was meant for them. That question may be more revealing than the answer. Why do you want the tablet to speak directly to your time? Perhaps because your own era feels unusually fragile. Perhaps because ancient authority makes modern anxiety feel less lonely. Perhaps because a warning from the past turns fear into continuity. Others feared this too. Others thought order was ending. Others watched the sky. Others waited. That continuity is real. You can feel it across thousands of years. The ancient observer and the modern listener are separated by technology, language, religion, and scale, yet both look at uncertainty and search for meanings. The methods differ. The need remains familiar. You stand beneath a modern night sky now. Satellites move silently overhead. Airplanes cross distant horizons. Weather systems are tracked across oceans. News reaches you instantly. Knowledge has expanded enormously. Certainty has not. That may be the enduring reason prophecy keeps returning. Human beings can calculate more than ever, yet the future still refuses to become completely visible. So people turn toward patterns. Some search statistics. Some search history. Some search ancient tablets. Some search the stars. All are asking variations of the same question. What happens next? The old text cannot answer that perfectly. Neither can the present, but perhaps the repeated search itself tells you something important. Prophecy survives because uncertainty survives. And as long as human beings continue living between memory and possibility, the ancient warning will always seem ready to speak again. Night settles softly over the plain, and the sky opens above you with almost impossible depth. The river moves somewhere beyond the darkened reeds, carrying reflections that tremble whenever the wind touches the water. Mud brick walls hold the day's warmth, while the scent of dust, herbs, and cooling earth drifts through the quiet streets. Nothing in the landscape announces a final answer. Perhaps that is appropriate. Ancient Mesopotamian people lived beneath this same scar, without knowing how their civilization would eventually be remembered. They did not know that their cities would become ruins, that their language would fall seaward, or that strangers thousands of years later would study tiny marks pressed into clay. To them, history was unfinished. The same is true for you. Every generation stands inside its own unfinished story, surrounded by events whose meaning seems obvious only much later. A political crisis may become a turning point, or merely one disturbance among many. A severe season may transform a society, or fade into a longer pattern of recovery. The future does not explain itself while arriving. That sentence encourages interpretation. You look upward and imagine an ancient scholar doing the same. He notices the moon, planets, wind, clouds, and movement of stars. His knowledge is impressive for his age. Yet he understands that observation alone cannot reveal every consequence. So he records, he compares, he waits. Somewhere within that patient habit lies the real dignity of the surviving tablets. They preserve human beings attempting to understand a world much larger than themselves. Their methods belong to ancient religion and scholarship, but their desire to recognize danger feels familiar. Records from archaeological collections confirm that Mesopotamian scholars preserved observations across generations with extraordinary discipline. Researchers at universities such as Oxford University and Yale University continue examining these texts because they reveal how early societies organized knowledge about nature, politics, and uncertainty. That achievement needs no hidden countdown. It already carries wonder. A handful of clay can preserve thousands of nights. You imagine the tablet freshly made, its surface still damp beneath a scribe's fingers. Perhaps he expects another scholar to read it within days. Perhaps the information concerns a ruler, a celestial event, or some unusual condition requiring attention. He cannot imagine you, yet you are listening. This strange connection across time may be more powerful than any prophecy. The tablet survives not because it correctly names the modern world, but because human concerns endure long enough to make its language feel familiar. Fear of disorder survives. Fear of failed harvests survives. Fear of dangerous rulers survives. Fear of natural forces survives. The details change, but vulnerability remains. Scholars continue debating how ancient communities understood the relationship between divine signs and historical causation. Some interpretations emphasize ritual tradition, while others focus more strongly on observation, political practice, and inherited scholarly systems. The debate does not weaken the evidence. It reveals its richness. Ancient Mesopotamian thought was not one simple worldview shared identically by everyone. Kings, priests, farmers, merchants, labourers, and scholars experienced uncertainty differently. A farmer might look at dark clouds and think first about crops. A court scholar might think about omens. A merchant might worry about roads. A ruler might wonder whether the sign concerns his throne. One sky contained many meanings. That is worth remembering whenever a modern story claims that one ancient sign has only one possible interpretation. The surviving world was more complicated than that. meaning change with position. It still does. You can observe the same principle today. A severe storm means scientific data to one person, economic risk to another, personal tragedy to someone else, and symbolic warning to another. The event is sure. Interpretation is not. This is why the question surrounding 5 signs remains unresolved. A darkened moon can be real without becoming prophecy. A planetary meeting can be real without announcing political change. Flooding can be real without fulfilling an ancient timetable. Social instability can be real without proving that history has entered a final stage. Facts do not automatically become sequence. Sequence does not automatically become destiny. One quirky possibility remains tempting, precisely because it cannot be settled completely. Perhaps ancient scribes sometimes noticed recurring historical rhythms that modern people underestimate. They observed long enough to understand that societies repeatedly move through prosperity, tension, conflict, recovery, and renewed ambition. Such insight would not require supernatural prediction. It would require memory. Human behavior supplies plenty of repetition. Kings seek power. Institutions grow rigid. Resources become contested. Neighbours become rivals. People adapt. New orders emerge. A thoughtful observer living through several decades could notice these patterns without believing history repeats perfectly. Perhaps some omen traditions preserve that intuition indirectly. A sign might not predict one future event. It might express a recurring condition. When strange skies appear during uncertain times, people become alert. When water fails or rises unexpectedly, political pressure increases. When leadership weakens, confidence falls. These relationships can recur naturally. The pattern is not mystical. It is human. You feel the night cooling now. The city around you has become almost silent, but faint sounds remain. A door closes, someone coughs behind a wall, water touches the canal bank, a distant animal shifts in the darkness. Ordinary life continues. That may be the strongest answer to every prophecy of final endings. People continue. Empires fall, yet families cook meals. Dynasties vanish, yet children learn words. Cities decline, yet stories travel. One political order disappears, and another begins using pieces of what survived. History rarely ends cleanly. It transforms. That transformation makes the idea of a final sign difficult to define. If one civilization collapses while another grows, whose ending counts? If one region suffers while another prospers, has the world entered disaster? Scale changes everything. Ancient Mesopotamians sometimes experienced events that felt absolute from their local perspective. A conquered city could appear to have lost the entire order of creation. Centuries later, historians see continuity. People moved, texts survived. Religious traditions changed form. Knowledge travelled. The supposed ending became transition. Perhaps modern people face the same danger of perspective. When you stand inside a crisis, everything appears larger. When you view it across centuries, patterns become different. This does not mean that present problems are unimportant. It means their final significance remains unknown. That uncertainty is not satisfying. It is historically honest. The stars above you have moved slightly westward. The same motion once guided observers who believed heaven could reveal danger. Modern astronomy explains those movements with extraordinary precision, yet no equation tells you exactly what human beings will decide tomorrow. The cosmos is predictable in ways society is not. That contrast may explain why prophecy remains seductive. People borrow certainty from the sky and apply it to history, but history contains choice. A ruler can compromise. A community can rebuild. A government can reform. A population can adapt. A warning can change behaviour. Possibility keeps the future open. This is where the mystery becomes gentler. Perhaps the ancient message is not that 5 signs inevitably lead toward one fixed conclusion. Perhaps the surviving traditions preserve something more modest. Watch carefully. Notice disruption. Remember patterns. Respond before danger grows. That advice would have mattered beside an ancient canal. It matters anywhere people depend on fragile systems. The tablets cannot tell you exactly what 2027 will contain. They cannot confirm that a final sign has arrived. But they can remind you that civilizations are strongest when they recognize vulnerability without surrendering to fear. The distinction is quiet. It may also be important. And perhaps beneath the same ancient sky, the story is not yet complete. The wind grows softer now, moving through the reeds with a low, steady sound. You no longer need to search the darkness for another sign. The moon keeps its patient course, and the river carries its reflection away without explanation. The clay rests quietly. It has carried enough. You can allow the unanswered questions to remain where they are, suspended between history and imagination. There is no need to force them into certainty tonight. The ancient cities have already returned to silence. Their kings have no armies now. Their scholars no longer climb rooftops to inspect the sky. Yet something gentle survives in the act of remembering them. You picture a final lamp burning beside a tablet while the city sleeps. The flame bends slightly when cool air enters through the doorway. A scribe sets down his reed and looks toward the darkened courtyard. His work is finished for the night. He does not know what tomorrow brings. Neither do you. That uncertainty can remain soft rather than frightening. History has always moved through unknown mornings. People wake. Water is drawn. Bread is prepared. Doors open. Life begins again. Perhaps some warnings are fulfilled. Perhaps others are misunderstood. Perhaps many belong to fears that return whenever human beings feel the ground shifting beneath familiar systems. You do not have to solve that tonight. Let the stars remain distant. Let the river keep moving. Let the unfinished tablet rest beneath its quiet layer of dust. And as the ancient plain fades into darkness, perhaps the deepest message is simply that humanity has always watched, wondered, feared, rebuilt, and continued. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Good night,